Yesterday we had the annual academic board meeting, and one of the items that we touched upon was the submission, the new Greek law for the establishment of branch campuses in Greece, and the application that Metropolitan College has submitted on behalf of our three parent institutions. So we realize that the reason the Greek government decided to initiate and introduce this law was the experience of T&E, of transnational education behind it. Without T&E, without the success of Greece in being the number one country in Europe in terms of transnational education and student numbers, that is the reason why we, the government, created this new law in anticipation of future developments concerning the change of the Constitution of Article 16. The idea started from Dimitris Diamandis. We had a discussion and we thought that it is good to link the applications to the ministry, the academic board meeting, the discussion around it with a conference like this, which shows the success of Metropolitan College, together with our partner institutions, to reach that level of T&E studentship. And in recognition of the success, we submitted an application on behalf of University of East London, our largest partner, Queen Margaret University, our longest serving partner, and Keele University, a new institution coming to Greece in order to establish both a medical school and together with some other specializations. We are fortunate that Vangelis Tsilgiris has been very helpful, has put together a plan for this conference, and he succeeded to bring some well-known and knowledgeable people from the UK who are going to link with us and tell us their experience about T&E. But the thing that I would like to close this brief introduction is to say that the experience that Metropolitan College has in dealing with foreign institutions for so many years at so different levels is unique in Greece. There is no other institution. Of course, the public universities have very little experience of dealing. And we are going to see that when 100 and something applications are arriving from different universities for dual degrees, mostly at postgraduate level. This is something different, by the way, than the Greek law for the establishment of branch campuses. There should be no confusion between the two. Maybe the government presents it as a package, but that's a different story. Dual degree, a master's with another institution is an easy job. To set up a branch campus with so many programs, with more than one institutions, and we have 5 institutions as partners, is not an easy job, and therefore the experience that we have acquired has to be acknowledged and applauded. So, I would like now to ask Vangelis to say a few words, since he has played a major role in this conference, and then we'll take it forward with the rest of the program. Vangelis.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay, good morning, everyone. Just to say, I'm not going to sing, because when my students see me wearing this, they are thinking that I'm going to sing. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to put this event together because I think, and I will start from that, I will go a bit further and I would say what Metropolitan has done is, and I've repeated that yesterday, is a unique model globally. And in Europe, uh, first of all, TNE globally is led by the UK. For the UK, the major market in Europe is Greece, and Metropolitan is the largest TNE provider in Greece. So to extrapolate that, globally, Metropolitan College is one of the major players in TNE. And the model that Metropolitan College has managed to develop, maintaining the growth in the numbers alongside the quality assurance element, is unique. So is innovation while expanding and keeping a healthy bottom line and also a quality side of things, which is a very difficult thing to do. So that summarizes how I personally perceive the model that you have here. So for today's event, what we've tried to do is we try to put together sessions that reflect the different aspects of the developments, the role of private providers, the overall developments in the global HE space and where TNE sits within that, and then some examples of what different universities from the UK are doing through Metropolitan College. So our first speaker is Dr. Janet Ilieva, who is a well-known researcher globally. We've been doing a lot of work together for the likes of British Council, Universities UK, and many universities around the world. Previously, she was a British Council member, and then he was also part of the HEFKI, that used to be the funding body of the UK before the Office for Students. So possibly my personal perception, but then again, others agree with me. Janet is one of the leading voices in the global HE space, and therefore I think it will be very useful to hear from her views. She is going to give us an overview of the different developments in global HE with some insights on TNE. So with all the wonders and magics of technology, hopefully things will work. See what happens. She will join us via Teams. And just to say before Janet goes on,
Thank you very much, Vangelis. Can I check? You can hear me and you can see me well?
Perfect, yes.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Thank you so much for the very kind introduction. I'm truly honored to join you today at today's conference on shaping the future of transnational education in Greece. It is fair to say that this is a very critical time for everyone engaged in the delivery and the provision of transnational education. This is shaped by fast-paced regulatory changes in the regulatory environment of the provision of higher education, and also surrounded by unprecedentedly high levels of global uncertainty. Yet, this is a most opportune endeavor, supported by a growing number of governments overseas, also sought by universities, and there is a growing demand by students globally. What I will do over the next 20 minutes or so is try to share some slides that basically show some personal reflections on transnational education. And if I can just check whether you can see my screen. Am I sharing anything or not yet?
Not yet.
Right. I'm afraid I wonder, Vangelis, whether it might be better if you share from your end, because...
Yes, we can do that, I think. Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. That's really appreciated.
Yep. Yes, we can see the slides. We're sharing the local copy, but we cannot see you at the moment. So I hope that's fine with you.
Can you still not see me, or am I on the screen?
No, we cannot see you now. We can see full screen, but we can hear you.
Okay. Oh, that's fantastic. I'm not sure what is going on with my Teams version, but yes, if you could share the slides as far as you can hear me.
It's fine. Just let me know when you want me to change the slides, and I will do that for you.
Oh, that's really appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. Janet?
Right. I can't see your screen, but if you tell me, so you're not on the
second slide.
On the second slide, aims and objectives. What I'll do, Vangelis, is I'll read the title of the slides so that you know. We can just ensure we're on the same slides.
Yep.
Thank you so much. What we'll do is we'll go through the aims and objectives of this presentation, and the focus is solely on the evolution of transnational education. But we'll also consider how the role of transnational education has evolved over time. There will be a strong focus on transnational education delivered by UK universities. And the rationale behind this is that there is very good data on UK T&E that basically started since early 2000s. The global education context has evolved and rapidly changed over the past decades, and so has the role of transnational education. So T&E has very much evolved in response to unmet domestic demand for higher education, and traditionally has catered to the needs to diverse student population, students that for some reason might have not had the opportunity to join and study in a classical educational context, such as full-time education in the location where they live, for example. But interestingly, transnational education has also evolved to contribute to national priorities of governments. And these national priorities have also evolved and changed over time. I will close this presentation with considering how the traditional models of T&E have evolved, so that from a provider perspective, they have become more and more student-centered and evolving around the changing student needs. And if I may go to the next slide, Vangelis. The slide is around the evolution of transnational education. Transnational education has been around for some time, and the example that you can see on your screen is really based on the University of London. The University of London was one of the very first documented examples of an institution that created institutes around the globe. And those institutes, as they developed and catered to the growing needs of their domestic populations, over time became national universities. It is also fair to say that the University of London was a pioneer in admitting women to higher education. And the example here goes back to 1868, when the Senate of the university voted to admit women to sit the general examination for the very first time. example of universities that were built initially as institutes of the University of London have later became, like, for instance, the University of Khartoum, initially set up in 1948, but some 8 years later, it has become the national university of the country. And similarly, University College of West India, later on becoming the University of West Indies, and so did with the University of Ghana, University of Nigeria, another institute which is the part of the University of East Africa, and so forth. So these are just some examples going back well beyond the data of transnational education actually started. But it is based on a case study of an institution that has been quite actively engaged in the delivery of transnational education possibly for over the course of a century. And if we can go on to the next slide, Vangelis. Moving on to the current century, well, not quite, but we are getting there. Over the past years, perhaps the first documented expansion of transnational education was immediately in the aftermath of the East Asia currency crisis of 1997. The currency crisis led to significant depreciations of the local currency that resulted in reductions of the disposable income and had a negative impact on the scholarships awarded by local governments for their domestic students to study abroad. But equally, it also impacted the disposable income of those families sending their kids to study overseas. If we just consider the UK data, the top sending countries for international students were Malaysia, Hong Kong, Singapore, and that was also the time when there was a growing demand coming from China. The currency crisis impacted particularly those geographies. What happened as a result of that was a significant liberalization of the domestic education provision. Significant constraints on public spending on education also meant that the governments were increasingly willing to allow private providers to step into that space and engage in the delivery of higher education. In parallel to the liberalization of private higher education in those countries, we also saw expansion of transnational education or foreign programs being delivered across East and Southeast Asia, including China. It was in early 2000 when the government of Malaysia invited the University of Nottingham to set up a branch campus in the country. And that happened under the direct instructions of the president of Malaysia at the time, who was also an alumnus of the University of Nottingham. There are some certain parallels, fast forward some 20, 25 years later. What we're seeing post-COVID is significant constraints on public spending on education. Many countries had to spend in terms of tackling the pandemic, which meant significant reduction in the disposable resources to spend on the provision of higher education. As a result, what happened was a growing liberalization across higher education systems globally, which was evidenced by changes in the legislation of HE delivery, and that encouraged the private providers to step into that space and to engage in the delivery of higher education. Notable examples of these developments were seen in India, but also in Greece and many other countries. Parallel to that, there was a growing recognition of transnational education globally, but also a significant relaxation in the regulatory frameworks that aided its development and local delivery. If we can go on to the next slide, please. It's basically, this slide reviews some examples of changes in the regulatory provision for transnational education over the past 6 years. So it basically starts the time just before the pandemic. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is just to illustrate that the world's most populous countries have significantly revamped their regulatory frameworks to allow for greater and more regulated transnational education, but equally to that, a significant increase in the recognition of transnational education degrees. Perhaps the most notable example comes from the country with the most populous youthful population in the world, which is India. India's University Grants Commission regulations that surrounds offer of twinning, joint degrees, and dual degree programs with foreign higher education institutions was passed in 2022. And the idea behind this was to facilitate a foreign provision legislation that signals the openness of domestic higher education system to global universities. Pre-2022, what India also did was passing the national education policy, which signaled the country's ambition that by 2035, India would have reached 50% participation targets in higher education. In addition to India, Pakistan is the third largest country in the world in terms of youthful population. So what we saw there is a new policy for higher education institutions to offer degree programs in collaboration with foreign universities. And this only happened over the past 2 years. Another example is Egypt's law from 2018. The law was passed in that year, and then it was implemented a year later in terms of establishment and organization of international branch campuses. There are several foreign branch campuses that are fully operational in Egypt already. So there has been a very significant fast-paced development in that space. Nigeria is also one of the top 5, is the most populous country in the African continent. And in 2023, it published its guidelines on transnational education. The guidelines have been making over the past 5 years. However, they only came to fruition and was officially published in 2023. Another country with significant relaxation of its provision for TNE is Indonesia, which again is in the top 5 most populous countries in the world. And such legislation was passed in 2018. The Philippines is a country very close to heart, where I have been actively involved in basically the policy consultation that surrounds transnational education. The Transnational Higher Education Act was passed in August in 2019, following a successful pilot that ran in the country with some of the most notable universities of the Philippines, and following a 2-year program, pilot program on transnational education. A Higher Education Act was passed in 2019. The country is currently in the making of a transnational education policy, which is probably likely to be published over the next year. Significant changes in the regulatory provision were also noted in Vietnam. The latest batch of such changes was published in October last year. They mainly impacted Degree 86, which resulted in a significant relaxation to the setup and the capital requirements of branch campuses in the country. But in addition to that, there is significant government support on behalf of MOET, Ministry of Education and Training, in terms of supporting the universities to engage more and more in the provision of collaborative programs with foreign universities. The idea behind that push is to really open Vietnam's higher education to international students, and through TNE to contribute to significant internationalization of the country's higher education system, but also to improve the English language proficiency among students, but also academics. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. What we see here is a slide with the title of a notable expansion of UK transnational education, looking at the supply of UK TNE. So quite a few of my next slides really focus on UK TNE. The idea is not really to focus on the UK as a provider of such programs, but really to track which types of programs have expanded over the past decades, and really using the UK as a proxy in terms of which type of TNE has expanded in the country. The first systematic collection in the UK started in year 2007. There was TNE data collection before that, but in 2007 it became compulsory field for reporting by the higher education institutions. Their data was reported to the Higher Education Statistics Agency, HISA. The chart, actually, the map of the world is color-coded. The darker the shade, the higher the concentration of TNE. So most of the TNE is concentrated in China and in Southeast Asia. And in Europe overall, most of the students are concentrated in Greece, but also in Germany. In the latest data that are reported by HISA, there were 621,000 students that were enrolled on transnational education programs. And this marks 8% growth compared to the previous year. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Again, I'm using the UK just as a proxy for the types of TNE that have seen the most significant growth. Overall, there has been a significant expansion of TNE. What is fair to say that almost half of the provision is concentrated in other arrangements that are mainly collaborative provision. By collaborative provision, here we mean franchise programs, dual degrees, double degrees, or provision where the universities have to work in partnerships in the delivery of such programs. The data shows a little bit of a dip in terms of distance, flexible and distributed learning. I think the dip is not really a decline as such. It's basically one of the biggest distance learning providers, the Open University. Some of their data was reported as a collaborative provision. If we can go on to the next slide, please. The slide shows transnational education in the EU, again, by type of provision. And Greece here is one of the most significant players. There has been a significant expansion, especially over the past year, of transnational education across the EU. I would also like to draw on quite a significant difference between EU students coming to the UK to study compared to those that are actually enrolled on transnational education programs. Those coming to the UK have significantly dipped post-Brexit, whereas those doing transnational education programs continue to expand. And this is a point of divergence where we see the TNE continues to provide access to programs that in the past have been fairly inaccessible to a significant number of students in their home countries. Again, the caveat I made earlier about distance and online programs, the deductions that you see there in distance programs is actually based on a difference in the reporting by the Open University, where most of the online provision, I believe mainly Malta and Cyprus, was recorded as a collaborative provision instead of online. It's basically supported distance learning provision in the country. If we can move on to the next slide, please. It's really from this point onwards, the focus of the slides are about the role of transnational education in changing educational context locally. What you see here is a chart that shows growing global student demand for international education. As the latest UNESCO data shows, in 2022, there were almost 7 million students enrolled in higher education programs outside their home countries. The latest data shows continued interest to study abroad, but what is quite a notable distinction there is the rise of new global study destinations. And a particular feature of these new study destinations are that they're much closer to students' home places, and they also provide very cost-effective study options to international students. If we can move on to the next slide. The slide basically shows the major study destinations across the world. I have excluded the USA from this chart because if I was to include the USA in the chart, it would have squashed everybody else right at the bottom. So you wouldn't be able to see who is doing what. What is interesting to see here is the rise of new non-English speaking study destinations, such as the United Arab Emirates, China, Turkey. Under Japan, you would have seen Malaysia and some other countries. So a notable feature of this slide is that new study destinations are challenging the dominant position of mainly English-speaking countries that used to dominate, or they used to be the top host countries for internationally mobile students. And the biggest growth over the past decade is basically concentrated in non-English speaking destination countries. And if we move on to the next slide, what I've done here is really show the number of inbound internationally mobile students, but plotting that against on the horizontal axis, what you can see is transnational education, but not absolute numbers, TNE, but transnational education expressed as percentage of domestic tertiary enrollments. So in countries like Hong Kong, Malaysia, and the UAE, Bahrain, Mauritius, TNE actually accounts for significant proportion of the domestic enrollments, which basically shows that TNE programs cater to a large number of students, but also those countries are increasingly becoming unattractive study destinations for international students. This may be partly explained with the fact that many TNE programs are delivered in the English language, which means higher education programs are accessible to nationals that outside those of the host country, or any global speakers of the English language can basically do a program that is taught in the means of an English language. Many of those study destinations have actually become international student hubs. Such student hubs were declared basically in Bahrain, in Malaysia, the UAE, and quite a few other smaller countries such as Singapore and a few others. If we can move on to the next slide, please. This slide draws on a piece of research that I had the privilege to work alongside Vangelis and also the UK Quality Assurance Agency. The study was carried out for the British Council, and at the bottom you can actually see the URL where you can access the research findings. But what happened there, it draws on session which was curated by the UK Quality Assurance Agency with other sister organizations, predominantly quality assurance agencies, and they were asked about the purpose of T&E in their home territory, in their home country. And as you can see, the top role for T&E is really becoming concentrated internationalization of domestic HE provision, but alongside that is also widening access to HE or catering to the needs of atypical students, but also becoming a hub, catering to the economic ambitions of the country and also attracting international talent. Many of the top sending countries for international students have been impacted by significant brain drain. And what T&E has raised to do in those countries is really contribute to brain circulation, such as they can continue to send students to various study destinations globally, but also the respective countries becoming a student hub or a host country for transnational education. And can we move on to the next slide, please? And it's really the next, the final concluding slide of this presentation is the shifts in the model of transnational education. So the very final slide looks at shifts in the drivers and models of transnational education. Past model, what we're seeing is a very notable shift away from a dominant partner in the transnational education relationship towards a collaboration between equals, where the 2, 3 or more collaborating partners have equal say over the provision of transnational education. There is also a move away from short-term, often informal arrangements, typically initiated by 1 or 2 academics and their partners in the respective institution, towards T&E partnerships that are part of a long-term global engagement strategy, where the T&E plays a prominent role of a university-wide engagement strategy. And as such, these partnerships or relationships are raised up in terms of importance, given much greater focus, but also resources to be carried out. And they are a significant pillar that underpins the engagement strategy of the respective university. There is also a shift away from mainly targets, T&E targets that in the past used to be very much focused on the student numbers, towards more sustainable student-centered approaches that are very much focused on the student success and local impact. And by student success, I mean there are measures in place that track the student satisfaction, how happy they are with the respective programs, for their graduate outcomes, the employability rate of students, and basically keeping in touch with students so that the institution knows how well they're doing on the back of the respective T&E course. And the final point there is T&E used to be mainly delivered in response to unmet student demand. It was very much a demand-driven function, often facilitated by local governments that would basically liberalize the respective domestic system to allow for foreign providers to engage in that space. And the real shift here is that we're seeing the T&E is in demand, not just by students, but also demand from universities that have global ambitions. And it becomes a real driver for internationalization of the curricula, but also internationalization of the partner institution, but also demand by governments that have international ambitions. They're either ambitions to become an international student hub, but well beyond that as well, ambitions where the governments want to see improved research ecosystem in the respective country, significant improvement in the university league table performance of the domestic institutions, but also, as we heard earlier, TNE increasingly caters to diverse student audiences, and these are atypical students. And this is the concluding slide of my presentation, and I thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Okay, probably you cannot see the room, but I can verify that everyone was looking at your presentation with great interest, and we are impressed with the insights. If I can take advantage of your time, since I got you up very early.
No problem. I've got a long day ahead of me, so thank you for that.
I just want to open the floor for possibly one question, if there's one question. I have a couple, but I skip that, so I don't want to be selfish on that. So if there's one question you want to ask Janet, feel free. Otherwise, I go with mine. My question, Janet, is how do you see this move of the Greek government to go into enabling international branch campuses to set up in the country? And what's your view on overall on the role of branch campuses and the aspiration of governments in transforming countries into education hubs through international branch campuses? So how do you see that within the context of Greece and Europe as well? So if you can, and no pressure, is mostly about your opinion. We just need your opinion. We're not looking for hard data or anything. We're just looking for your insight on that.
It is a fantastic question, Vangelis. Thank you so much for that. I think that it's fair to say that the branch campuses are a very small proportion of the TNE. On the HISA data, they account for roughly 7% of the overall student population. However, I would approach that issue from two perspectives. From supply side perspective, that most of the countries that have liberalized their transnational education provision, there was a very strong focus on branch campuses because capital investment is the hardest one to crack. And it's also the highest form of commitment to the country's higher education system. So from the examples I gave earlier, especially like India, Indonesia, Egypt, Philippines, Vietnam, all those countries, the real big focus on TNE is on international branch campuses. Why those are important, I think it's really actually a fascinating topic to discuss there. Having the commitment to location is really very significant. It also means that there is on-the-ground know-how transfer from one institution to another. It's also perhaps the highest form of commitment to a place because it requires a significant amount of capital investment. It's probably one of the types of transnational education where I've seen perhaps the greatest innovation. The traditional model used to be a university would go overseas and set up an institution. I think that in terms of self-invested branch campus, perhaps the latest university that did that was University of Birmingham in Dubai. What we've seen since then is joint ventures, predominantly joint ventures, where universities would come together to set up a branch campus. And a fantastic example of that is, for example, Lancaster Deakin. That's the UK's Lancaster University with Australia's Deakin universities, a university setting up a branch campus, joint branch campus in Indonesia. Previous example of joint ventures that we've seen is typically an international university would partner with a local university, and in China, this is part of the law they have to partner with a local university to set up an independent institution. But what we've seen in terms of innovation is a really kind of wide variety of joint ventures, which over the past few years have increasingly implied an investor, basically an investor that may focus on the capital provision, on the capital investment, and they'll take responsibility of the infrastructure, which basically frees resources for the university to mainly focus on the academic content, on the academic delivery of the academic resources, and basically the delivery of programs of what they're best at. So it's kind of a three-party engagement. We're seeing local governments, investors, universities engaged heavily in the delivery of the branch campus. I think it's fantastic for the students because just in terms of evolution of global mobility, in the past it used to be predominantly students, but part of that big trend is programs, but also universities. So the barriers in terms of mobility, physical mobility of students, programs, universities, there are fewer and fewer of those out there. And I think it's really pleasing to see that a growing number of countries, in particular Greece, joining that trend and allowing a development that has been in the making for a very long time. I mean, I can carry on talking about the topic for a while, but a basic personal opinion is it is a fantastic development. And the real positivity there is that it's got the students right at the heart of it. It means more domestic opportunities for students. So it's no longer just the wealthy students that can acquire an international degree, but a growing number of domestic students that no longer have to leave their home cities to do so. They've got much wider range of options right there at their doorstep available.
Great summary, and thank you so much for doing that. Once again, we would like to thank you. If I can ask you, sorry, we have one more question from.
Yes.
Just give us a second. We need a mic.
Yep.
Hello, Janet. Can you hear me? Yes.
Very well. Yeah.
Do you see any trends towards transnational vocational education leading to transnational higher education?
It's an interesting question. Absolutely. I think the space that interacts between further education, vocational education, and HE is becoming very, very popular. And the reason why it's popular is because it widens the pathways into higher education. So it is certainly a fantastic growth area. And again, it caters to students that may change their mind over time. They don't have to be university goers as such. Where TNE has basically evolved most rapidly is in terms of validation programs, franchise programs, that started initially with institutions that didn't have higher education status in their home country. And it evolved as a top-up vocational program. But the idea was it's widened pathway into higher education. And what it does is that it's not just, it's a route to employment, which is very direct, very job-specific, but it widens the options for the students. They can join the labor market, or they can continue their HE career should they want to do so. So the vocational space, especially in areas where there is an employer or an industry involved, are the ones that are seeing a growing popularity. I mean, if one looks on the HISA record, you can see that a significant expansion is in non-degree programs. So these are various certificates, courses. The whole space of micro-credentials is phenomenal. It's very job-specific. It's very, very niche. But it also means that universities or vocational colleges can work and can partner directly with employers to deliver a degree, a qualification sought by the market and currently unavailable out there? The short answer is yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So let me thank once again Janet. Thank you so much for doing that.
My pleasure.
And enjoy the rest of your day. I will debrief you later on today. Thanks a lot. Thanks for doing that. Okay.
Thanks a lot. Have a successful conference.
Thank you.
Bye.
And it seems that we are on time, which is a bit unusual for me when I'm managing sessions. So I will skip my contribution briefly. So to summarize, I think the key message there is that there's a lot of things going on. Global higher education is growing as it used to. TNE plays now a central role in what seems to be global engagement of universities around the world. There's more synergies, there's more equity, and there's more demand for this mutuality in the collaboration. And I think what Janet highlighted is the majority of transnational education, which I would simply say, let's forget about the term TNE because we are going to listen to that term many times. It's about collaboration across borders. And the important thing is that as a context for higher education, typically universities are international by default. And that's a very interesting remark to remember, because at times like this, for instance, when the world is going in a different direction, always universities continue to look for opportunities to internationalize. Now, that has a market business side impact, which means that it's going to be a market that, irrespective of the mayhem that goes on the financial markets, higher education will continue to grow in that international space. But also, it has a more qualitative element, that what drives quality in higher education is this collaboration across borders. And one example, as we have discussed yesterday, is, for instance, research. We know that internationally co-authored publications have a higher field-weighted citation impact index. So there's always this aspect of how we collaborate, how we do things together. So it's beyond TNE. That's my main summary. So I will invite the panelists for the next session, which is starting at 11:30. So we are bang on time. The role of private providers in TNE. We have two panelists who are local and two panelists online. So I will invite Yannis Matsoukas from Metropolitan College and Katerina Fengarou from the British Council to join me. While also we have online Emily Owen from Times Higher Education and Piers Wall from the Quality Assurance Agency in the UK. So first allow me to go to the online speakers first, because it's a bit more difficult for them. Emily, Piers, thank you so much for joining online. I know it's a bit early for you over there, not as early as Janet, but still, yeah. So thanks a lot for doing that. We will manage to work out on the logistics of it. And I will invite as well, welcome Yannis Matsoukas and Katerina Fengarou. So the topic of our discussion today is the role of private providers in TNE. And I have an opening question that what is the evolving role of these private providers within this global landscape? And specifically, I will direct some specific questions to some of you to begin with. So first of all, let's go on to the British Council. So go first on the UK side, and and get an idea of how important are the private providers for the British higher education system globally. So if I can invite Katerina to give us her views on that.
Thank you, Vangelis, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. Since I received the invitation to be part of this panel, I had to read again the internationalization strategy for education. I found no specific distinction between state and private delivery of T&E in the strategy, but there was a lot of mentions throughout the strategy that the UK is really open to cooperate with different partners to support the quality, the excellence of British education anywhere that it is provided in the globe. Right now, we have more than 228 countries or territories around the globe that they offer T&E education, and your presentation and Janet's presentation show the enormous number of students that they attend. If we focus on the Greece example, yes, the private sector was the one that started to offer T&E in this part of Europe, and as far as the numbers are concerned, Greece is the top provider in Europe and sixth provider in the world. So this shows the acceptance of the UK T&E by the students, the academics, the local partners. And this is a proof that despite all the difficulties that the private provision had to face for so many years, the private delivery of T&E in Greece is a great example of T&E provision. And the UK is very keen to support this provision, even for the next years, despite all the evolving character of the market. We are with you and here to support in any way. Perfect. So I don't know if I cover your question.
You did. Thank you. Thanks for that. And thanks for being brief and to the point.
Thank you.
I will go on to Emily. So Emily is with Times Higher, and Times Higher is doing a number of things that we are well aware of. So how do you see the sector's perception of the private T&E? So how the private T&E is involving in media and possibly in rankings as well. So how do you see that? So how do you see that?
Yeah, thank you so much, and it's great to be here online joining you all today. I think it's a great question. I think there's a lot of change and dynamism in T&E across the sector at the moment. And maybe the first point I can make here is around the definition of some of the terms that we use when we talk about sector and private provider, who that really includes. I think from recent work that we've undertaken at Times Higher, this has included UK universities, governments, and even investors as well. So for us, the term private provider is now encompassing a really wide range of stakeholders. I think some of those stakeholders have a really, really important impact on the way that we speak about T&E, especially in, as you've mentioned, media discourse and rankings as well. And for those of you that are familiar with our World University Rankings methodology at Times Higher, you'll know that we work across different pillars, including teaching, international outlook, and industry as well. And maybe if I comment on teaching, first of all, and how that might be evolving, I want to touch on a recent project that we did with the UK Department for Business and Trade in Ghana. So in this project, we engaged with an organisation, a private organisation called Empire Africa Institute. They have a partnership with a UK specialist university who are currently about to launch an online programme for Ghanaian students. And what Empire Africa Institute is doing for that institution is providing a physical presence in Accra for those students to attend. maybe to take part in kind of collaborative teamwork, to access library resources, and so on. So what they can do is bring that hybridity to online learning. And of course, we know that that has such an effect on boosting the quality and credibility and reputation of online courses delivered through TNE. So that's the first point that I would make. And maybe if I think about our industry pillar as well, which isn't always one that gets the most kind of attention, and, you know, it's not one of the ones that people always talk about. But some of you may have seen my colleagues at Times Higher, Dr. Ishan Kader and Elizabeth Shepherd, released a brilliant report last year where they introduced a concept that they called TNE 3.0. And what this really meant was a kind of an idea of TNE at the ecosystem level, where we're thinking about the teaching and academic side and of course research, but also how TNE can engage in the kind of economic infrastructure of a country and how it might contribute more widely to national and regional development. So I think that could be another way in which TNE is evolving at the moment. And maybe just a last point to make on this question, and we know there's so much activity, but if we were to flex that definition of private provider a little bit further and potentially include private investors in that term as well, I think this is a really interesting emerging topic in that private investors can facilitate TNE that's far more visible and large, like an international branch campus, especially in those markets where risk appetites might be low. And maybe if I speak from a UK perspective, we know there's significant financial challenges, for example, in the sector at the moment. And if an investor can kind of de-risk that proposition, they could have significant advantages. I think especially in markets that might be emerging rather than established, where a UK university or indeed a university from elsewhere could have significant first mover advantages in that market, and where an investor can de-risk that for them, it becomes a lot more appealing. So I think that would be my kind of contribution to the evolution, and especially thinking about rankings too.
Perfect. Before going to Yanis, because you need to go last, because you are our host, so we need to give the floor first to our speakers. Sorry, I'm just joking. It's not in the plan, Piers, but I want to go to you, and sorry for going off script here, because you were not meant to be prompt with a question here. But I'm tempted, because the Quality Assurance Agency in the UK has a lot of experience in conducting evaluations and see things on the ground around the world. So what is your view about the evolving role of private providers in the context of TNE? So if you could give us a brief insight on how you see this, the role of the private providers within TNE.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. Thanks for putting me on the spot. I'm glad to answer this because, to be honest, so part of my role includes managing what's called the Quality Evaluation and Enhancement of TNE for UKHE, a QE-TNE scheme. And this conversation about private providers working with UK institutions, etc. You heard earlier that there is no distinction in the UK system for whether it's a private provider or a state public provider. The same rules apply, the same regulations apply. So on the scheme that we've been running for 3.5 years, so we've looked at partnership TNE arrangements in UAE, in Germany, in Egypt, in Sri Lanka, etc., etc. So in China, and it's been really interesting to see how private organisations are involved in those arrangements, and they differ, but they are fundamental to a lot of those TNE arrangements. Partly for the reason Emily said, there's financial backing there. In some regulatory worlds, you need an infrastructure partner, and it's been interesting to see the infrastructure partner not just dealing with space, accommodation, or rooms, but actually involved in admissions, recruitment, in student support. So we've seen very different types of arrangement, all involving private providers. And I think it's difficult to see how then we could go back to not having private providers there, and why would we? Because we've also seen some very successful T&E arrangements. I've also want to sort of talk a little bit, we talk about those models, franchise, validation, and we've got these really nice boxes that we fit everybody in. The reality of those is that those boxes are much more, the walls are slightly more expandable, I would say. And in fact, we've published a piece around kind of the continuum of those partnership arrangements, that you can go from a franchise to a validation, and there's something in the middle of that. So a long-term franchise arrangement with a private provider has actually evolved into that mutual two-way partnership where the UK provider is taking things from the private provider in that country to apply to the UK as well. So I think there's real, there's a very clear trend that private providers are part of those arrangements, but that doesn't mean there is a quality risk necessarily. And I think that's probably the key thing to say here.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much. And that leads us to a private provider insight. So Yanis, if you could share an example of a distinctive model or partnership you have pioneered as Metropolitan College and you are proud of, what would that be?
Yeah. Before that, may I comment Janet's very interesting data from the Higher Education Statistics Agency, because they were revealed last week, so there are some very distinct points in there. By doing a comparative analysis of this data, we can see that Metropolitan College is the largest transnational education provider in Europe, UK T&E in Europe, and one of the largest globally. So it has pretty much the same number of students as Germany, the whole Germany. So this is very, very interesting. So what exactly we have done here at Metropolitan College is what exactly many people call us an agile partnership framework. This is our own, there's our distinctive T&E model. It's not franchise, it's not validation. If you zoom out, it's not as usual, So instead, it's about flexible, future-ready partnerships that are tailored to local demand, but always aligned with global regulations. So first, our T&E model is active across 8 different regions in Greece. I could say 9, because we have the digital campus now, a very large digital campus. So this is one of the most geographically distributed T&E ecosystems in the world. This brings T&E, the transnational higher education, directly into local communities, creating real pathways for students across the country. But it's not always about reach. So our second key pillar is academic co-creation. So we co-design our programs. We're not just delivering the curriculum, the curriculum that someone else has. So this means developing content that reflects local workforce needs and prioritizes graduate employability while fully upholding the academic standards of the 4 and very soon 5 awarding institutions. So currently we deliver more than 70 programs in our campuses in these 9 regions at undergraduate, postgraduate, and PhD, doctoral levels. So the third one is very interesting. We have introduced an innovative dual language format. So our students can complete their UK T&E degree entirely in Greek. So we make higher education, international higher education or transnational higher education, what you prefer, more accessible in these 8-9 regions. So it's a model that supports inclusion, progression, and the long-term mobility. So beyond that, we align our academic portfolio from undergraduate levels to executive education with key national and global priorities, both national and European as well. So digital transformation, healthcare reform, green innovation, just to name a few. Research is also embedded in our model. So our faculty lead research projects, they publish in index journals. If you check online in Elsevier database, you will see that there are many publications now as Metropolitan College. We receive invitations from the Times Higher Education, from the QS, to participate in research rankings. So we have to decide now that we need to do that, but we receive invitations, we are ready for that. So that's a clear sign that private transnational higher education partnerships can be research active, globally visible, and academic credible. But at its core, this particular framework, the Agile Partnership Framework, is about capacity building. So it strengthens our academic community, expands institution visibility, and provides students with real-world learning, enhance employability, and global opportunities. So this TNE model has also received international recognition from the British Council. There are a few reports recently by the QAA on the innovative, So for us, TNE, it's not about just delivering a franchise program or ticking a validation box. So what we have built all these years, sometimes referred, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that, or franchise plus or validation plus, is something more ambitious. So it's a true co-investment in international education, in innovation, and the most important, in student success.
Thank you very much for that. I want us to move to, so we highlighted the role of private providers, which is central to TNE in many regards. We saw the example of Metropolitan College, and we heard that there's actually no distinction between private and other providers from the UK side. Let's move on to the aspect of access and equitability and inclusion. There's a lot of arguments in favor of TNE being a driver of these elements. So, but at the same time, there's always been this criticism about the role of private providers in doing so, because mainly of their profit, for-profit status. So if we first hear from possibly peers about how does the assurance of quality intersect with issues of accessibility and equity, and if we can have a bit of reflection whether there's anything specific to private providers there or not. So, Piers?
Sure. So I think this is a really interesting question. So quality assurance really is a facilitator of effective processes of around standards to maintain and enhance provision. And so in a way, it's an enabler that delivers organizational strategies, objectives and goals. And those educational partnerships, whether that's whether they're TNE or whether they're UK based, help overcome those barriers to entry in higher education. And that links to the economic, the social, cultural and organizational barriers. So we can see that in UK partnerships where a university has a partnership with a college in the same region. And we can also see that through some of the TNE work. So I think it's a really interesting question. So for me, there is a connection. I think it's one of the things that we focused on in the scheme, and it was an intentional decision. So in the UK, a UK university has a responsibility that the students, wherever they are taught, has to have a comparable experience. And let's use that word, comparable. Now, comparable doesn't mean identical. So we deliberately focused on the scheme around where contextualization is taking place. And you've just heard some really good examples at Metropolitan College and how they built that in to their program development, their TNE work. So it's all around that. We looked at contextualization of the curricula, particularly around students, preparing students for local versus global engagement opportunities, employment opportunities. And so there is that balance to be struck between, for us, comparability and contextualization. And I think it's actually, we've identified where we've seen really good examples of that to the benefit of access, to the benefit of the region as good practice, in effect. So we're looking to see contextualization of employability, contextualization of assessments. We had an example where some students in Vietnam complained about an assessment that basically was a case study designed around a ski resort. And their argument was, this is nothing we can even relate to. And it was a very good example of something that needed to be contextualized. So I think it's really interesting hearing what was said earlier about how it's about co-creation. And I think all of that links into that equity point, really. Equality, diversity and inclusion are also really interesting because UK law, universities have to have policies on those things. But we also have to, when we look at T&E arrangements and where they are located, the law of the land has to apply as well. So that makes things slightly more challenging. And you need input and working with the partnership again about that relationship. I'm just going to give a couple of examples. It's really interesting to hear the mention of the work where a program is not delivered in English, but it's delivered in Greek. So we've done a case study of that particular arrangement. So thank you for the shout out, because we're really interested in, that's what I would describe as innovative thinking on behalf of the providers involved. But also the case study looks at how do you quality assure provision that is not delivered in English, because that's one of the concerns that the UK provider would have, but also so the partner would have. So it's a really interesting case study. And the other case study I mentioned is that we've just published something around a UK institution working with a partner in China around developing understanding of an EDI policy that would link to that particular arrangement. So for me, there is a big link between quality assurance, and there's also a really interesting arrangement around how private providers can be involved.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, the long answer there.
No, it's fine. Thank you. And thanks for referring to these two case studies. I will go on to Katerina, and obviously the British Council has a broader remit other than T&E and education. There's a broader range of things you are pursuing. So how the private providers are helping to reach out the underserved markets or student populations for the UK sector? How do you see that?
That's a great question, Vangelis, because in every equation there are different elements, and it's not only the UK and the local partner or the governments in both sides. The students are always one of the important factors. So with the private institutions providing the T&E, we've seen in Greece, because I'm working in this area for many, many years, and it's really important to see how the students perceived this provision. So it's really important because from the partner side, they address the local needs in the market. They monitor the needs of the market, the trends of the market. So they provide innovative programs. They meet the skill needs and the skill developments required by the market. So they make the students that may not have the opportunity to get the British education by studying in the UK, in their homeland, and they make them stronger and more qualified to address the needs of their market developments or their work. Also, it is really, really important, and this is feedback that we receive from students that they attend the partnerships here in Greece, is that they stay nearby their homes. Some of them may register to these programs even in a later stage of their life, not at the age of 18 when they graduate from the high school. So they may have family obligations or work obligations, and they decide in a later stage to attend higher education. And the private provision of UK T&E gives them the best opportunity to be qualified and upgrade their status in the Greek market. So this is most important for me as a person and as educator, that we give opportunities, you give the opportunities, the TNE providers, they give opportunities to students to get the best out of an excellent education system, but without leaving their homeland. And I think that matters a lot.
Thanks a lot for that. And again, I will go a bit off script, and now I'll put Emily on the spot. And sorry for doing that, Emily. That's another question not in the list, but I'm tempted to ask, you've been doing a lot of work as a consultant, conducting research 4 times higher together with Ishan and others. And you've been doing a lot of work around the role of TNE and as United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and all these elements. So is anything, and again, I'm not looking for hard evidence, just want your insight. Is anything you want to highlight about the role of TNE, and particularly if you have any examples or insights about the role of private providers in supporting these goals?
Yeah, very happy to be put on the spot with this question. And of course, at Times Higher, we have impact rankings, so really assessing performance of universities against those UN SDGs, as mentioned. So I think what this can really do, and of course, we have a huge amount of data at Times Higher submitted by universities themselves. And I think what this can really do is help us to see how TNE can be developed in those particular areas of strength. One example that comes to mind for me, and we're actually hosting a webinar on Monday on this, if anybody is interested. We are working with a private provider in Iraq currently, so not a market that we would typically think of when we think about UK TNE. TNE does exist, of course, in the country, but not at any kind of large scale. And what we're able to do when we look at our impact rankings and some of that data is pull out some of the areas where Iraqi institutions are really, really active and have a presence, and where they are really contributing towards those goals through their research and through their teaching. So the 2 that we've really pulled out for Iraq include, for example, clean water and sanitation. We know that there are some really significant skills needs in Iraq. They're at this point where they are transforming, where they're building new physical infrastructure, and of course they need a huge amount of skills to really support that. So some of the recommendations we're making, and we're speaking to UK potential TNE providers on Monday in this webinar, is to potentially develop specific TNE routes, whether that's in teaching, but also research as well, that might be built around these areas. And of course, that has such a significant benefit for that country where the TNE is taking place. So hopefully, if UK providers want to develop specific courses around sustainability, around water infrastructure, but also the research that can have, and also how that engages with other private organisations like industry, who may end up funding those projects. And I think there is a really, really nice multiplier effect when we think about some of these elements, especially in the SDGs, because there's such an appetite across the board to get involved in these kinds of projects. And I think it was mentioned earlier as well that we know when research, for example, is published in collaboration with international partners, the influence of that research is just completely transformed and multiplied at a huge scale. So yeah, I think Iraq maybe as one of the less obvious examples is a really nice one to pull out, but how TNE providers can really build courses and partnerships around specific areas of economic or regional need.
Thank you so much. Really, really interesting. Iraq is one I didn't have on the list, so really, really interesting to join you on that webinar. I will go on to Yanis, and obviously I started with that remark that there's always this perception that for-profit private providers there's a conflict between pursuing inclusivity and accessibility and affordability and so on. So I want us to target that perception because I think it's interesting to discuss it. So how do you address the challenge of ensuring that inclusivity, affordability, and local relevance? I mean, we've heard about the local relevance through the language aspect. If you could focus more on the inclusivity, affordability, what is the approach of Metropolitan College in those matters?
These three areas have been at the core of the mission of the college from the early stage, from the early years. So, as the model that I described earlier, the multi-campus TNE, this shows that we believe the founders, the owners now, believe that the transnational higher education is a privilege for for many. It's not just for the few. It's an opportunity that should be accessible and transformative for many regions, for all the regions of if we speak of, about Greece. So access, we offer, as I say, UK TNE degrees in 8+1 regions in Greece. So students don't need to relocate to Athens or to Thessaloniki to study for a UK degree. So that cuts costs, brings international education, high quality international education closer to their home. We have also addressed the language barriers. Now we're delivering the programs in Greek. So this makes TNE, UK TNE more inclusive, and especially for those that are not able to study in English. Now, we're a private higher education institution, so affordability matters too. So our programs, they are cost effective. We provide flexible options to professionals, to parents. So we believe that the TNE should fit into life and not the other way around. But access means little without local relevance. So we're modifying our programs. We know the national guidelines, where exactly we need to focus. We focus on hospitality, we focus on health, we focus on digital transformation, we focus on
AI.
AI, yeah. So yeah. And we embed real-world projects and community engagement into the learning process. The next building is a proof. Support is also a key. So from academic advising to well-being services, we ensure that students feel supported at all levels, at all campus, and included as well. So, and this particular approach has been recognized, has been acknowledged. So, for example, the impact rankings. So, Metropolitan College was the first college that participated in Times Higher Education impact ranking, outperforming most of the public universities in Greece. So, so access, affordability, and relevance are not add-ons in our model. So they're built in because transnational education should be equitable, should be empowering, and built for all the people at all ages.
Thanks for that. Thanks for the remarks there. I think the regional model is very interesting because there's also a social cost associated with students moving, even intra-country relocation. So, renowned are the Greek moms of losing their sons going to a different city. So I'm exaggerating, but it's always a social cost, especially in societies that have this strong cultural family bond. You see the same thing happening in India, where it's quite essential to have these satellite campuses within or locations within the country. So I think the point you're making there is the full economic and social cost makes sense in relation to the price the students pay for it, and is the overall value for money they get.
Of course, and the effect that our operations in these 8 regions have effect on the business, on the economy of these particular regions.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yes,
we can estimate. You know, yesterday there was a figure by one of the collaborative partners that they estimate this particular their effect, their contribution to the local economy. I don't want to mention this particular figure, but yes, there is a massive effect, a positive effect in the economy of these particular regions.
An important remark, though, there is, and we don't have anyone on the panel, but is an important remark there is, what are the pricing expectations of the UK side when it comes to supporting that kind of affordability? That sometimes there seems to be a disparity on, I mean, there's negotiations in the home campus. Oh, we're going to charge the MBA the same amount we are charging it in the main campus. But what about the affordability in that particular country?
Yes.
So I think that's also the dimension. So, I mean, private providers and T&E providers are doing their bit, but I think it's also an aspect of, when we're talking about affordability and access, there's also the UK side element there as well.
It's an excellent comment, and I think fits very well with one of the models that Janet described earlier. So in a hashtag, I'm not going to say more, ethical T&E.
That's a good, possibly a good theme for another event. Okay, I'll move on to the third question. So the third question, the third theme is more about the credibility and the quality. So it's all about how we ensure the credibility and quality of T&E provision in private institutions, particularly when the regulatory environment differs. And obviously, I will start with peers, because is sitting on a lot of evidence and has been driving a lot of developments on that. So what are the most common quality assurance challenges when evaluating private T&E partnerships?
This is a really interesting question. So I'm gonna cheat a little and say that I'm not sure that we distinguish between private and public providers when we look at the quality assurance necessarily. We've already said the same rules apply, quality code, etc., developed by the sector. So, but I think the broad challenges, and I can talk a little bit about what we've looked at when we have evaluated private institution partners. I think some of the broad challenges are going to be the same across public and private. One is around those regulatory differences. We've talked a lot about contextualization, so there's cultural differences, that context, the student experience expectations and support and how that's going to work. So in terms of the quality, I'd say where private providers are subject to different regulations in their own country, either no national regulations, then that can add complexity. And that means that the UK partner needs to fully understand what that complexity is and what it means and how they navigate that. And sometimes that may mean there are challenges around the governance, particularly around how private providers might work. You mentioned that the money side of things, and I think it's a really, really interesting question, not just from the private providers' point of view, but from the UK providers' point of view. And I think the whole fee conversation is a separate conversation, but it's a very interesting part of any provider's strategy, presumably. If you're really intending to charge the same for an MBA in Africa as you are in the UK, then realistically that's not likely going to be a very successful MBA. So I think the general challenge with all partnerships is allowing that flexibility, and you heard very eloquently that need for being flexible, allowing partnerships to kind of flow outside the boxes, providing those resources, and I think we have seen through the scheme work that private providers and institutions can be and may be able to be more innovative, more agile, and perhaps more responsive to local needs. That does depend on the country, but sometimes the national regulatory infrastructure for public state universities can be slightly restricting, whereas the private providers may be able to take a much more fluid, flexible approach, and that means it can be very well placed to work with private providers, with UK providers, and meet those regulatory challenges. On the scheme, we've seen a range, as I say, of different arrangements, and we've never looked distinctively differently at the quality assurance processes or about the enhancement process, whether it's a private provider or not.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I will go on to Emily. So Emily, how do rankings and international visibility affect the reputation of private providers, you think?
Yeah, thank you. I think international visibility is a really, really important thing to consider in TNE. And the first thing I'd say is that many private providers, especially some of those that we've worked with recently at Times Higher, do have that global presence now. One that comes to mind is NC UK, a UK-based provider. They're active in over 40 countries now. I think through their partnerships with different universities, and especially those that are growing in rankings, and maybe that's not necessarily the world university rankings, that might be an impact as well in some of those more niche areas. But I think something that comes to mind for me is also in validation arrangements as well, where a really highly ranked institution, whether that's in the UK or Australia or the US, just as a few that come to mind, can really support high quality experiences in other markets, but those that are also equitable. And if I may mention the example of City College and their relationship with the University of York in the UK. Of course, York is a Russell Group research intensive university. It does fairly well in the rankings as well. But it's not only delivering those courses to students in Greece, it's also delivering those courses to students in Armenia, in Azerbaijan, in Georgia, just to name a few. And I think really importantly here is that those kind of reputational elements that are associated with the University of York or other universities as a brand, if you like, has suddenly been disseminated across multiple markets, and students can really take advantage of that, you know, when it comes to their global kind of credibility as employees. It's really important. I think also to touch upon from a quality point of view here, and of course this isn't my area of expertise, but something that came to mind when Piers was sharing his insights is that in this arrangement, there's also a kind of partnership where faculty from the University of York can fly into those countries, where they can hire a space in a hotel or a similar venue. And those online learners can actually participate in face-to-face teaching, whether it's just for a weekend or a couple of days. I think really importantly, as we've heard, it's not always about, you know, an identical experience, but more about a comparable experience. We know that online learners, for example, have probably chosen that route to education for a reason. They like that flexibility. But if there's those kind of baked-in opportunities for them to experience the same kind of pedagogical innovations that a student based in the classroom in a UK can, then suddenly that quality is really baked in. And maybe if I mention one other example as well, which again relates to highly ranked institutions that are delivering TNE elsewhere, Malaysia is an example that really comes to mind. So a lot of activity from UK and Australian partners in Malaysia, from highly ranked institutions, of course, really attractive to those students who want a degree that's validated by those universities. But when we think about the kind of history of these relationships, lots of those partners were with private colleges who did not have degree awarding powers. So they started off as franchise arrangements, but through those elements of co-design, you know, like we've heard about at Metropolitan, knowledge sharing and capacity building, some of those colleges were able to then apply for degree awarding powers and became universities in their own right. So what was before working on a kind of franchise arrangement now exists as a joint or dual degree arrangement. So I think through kind of quality and credibility building, there can be so many opportunities for wider capacity building as well. And of course, that has a massive effect on the reputation and eventually, hopefully, the rankings of those institutions too.
Excellent. Thanks so much. We're just running a bit out of time. I'll go quickly to Katrina for a closing answer to this question. So how diplomatic and cultural institutions play a role in supporting scrutinizing this kind of collaboration? So is there a role of the British Council in that?
Great question, Vangelis. But let us remind ourselves that British Council is not a quality assurance agency. We leave this to the capable hands of the authorities like QAA. Our work is to oversee that the quality of British education is respected and promoted as it has to be in the Greek market. I mean, if we talk about Greece, we are the advisory body for the British universities in case they wish to partner with Greek, either private or state universities, to understand the local needs and the regulatory framework. We organize matching quality events, so we bring together the two ends in case they wish to explore possibilities of forming partnerships. And also, and most important, is to make sure that the quality journey of a student's experience is of the top quality as it is expected. This is the briefest answer I can give.
Thank you so much. I'm under pressure mainly because there is some coffee and desserts there, and everybody is like looking at me. So I'm just joking.
Okay.
Do we have a question possibly? Yes, a comment from Professor Arkumanis.
To make a comment based on my personal experience, which we haven't touched in this discussion. Many years ago, I graduated from a public Greek university where politics were part of everyday life, influencing even the content of higher education. Went to the UK for many, many, many years and forgot about the influence of politics on higher education. And I returned back to Greece. And it was interesting to see that the influence of politics on higher education remains to some degree diluted. But coming to Metropolitan College and the role of private education, we need to mention that its role is to dilute up to a large extent the influence of politics and to prepare students to be better citizens when they finish and graduate. This is an important social contribution that we shouldn't forget.
Excellent point. And we couldn't agree more. Thank you. Thank you for that. So let me join me in thanking all the panelists. Thank you so much for your contribution. We did well, I think, and considering the time as well. I overran just for 4 minutes. Yes, we will have a group photograph. So Emily and Piers, if you just stay where you are, we are going to do the directing there and do the photo shoot.
After a 15 minutes break, I think that it's the time to move on. So we have a new session for today, titled Successful T&E Partnership in Europe, the case of Metropolitan College. For those that attend here in the amphitheater and also for those watching via YouTube, just to make the introductions, I'm Vangelis Kondaxakis, Deputy Principal Research and Innovation at Metropolitan College. And today I will be the moderator. A brief introduction about this session, and without repeating what we have heard so far, is that when we mean successful partnership, basically we talk about academic quality assurance, student success and employability, institutional reputation, sustainability, and regulatory compliance. Those are important, so for this session, we plan to discuss 4 main topics. What are the metrics for a successful T&E provider, and at the same time relate to the collaboration that we have with Metropolitan College and the case study of Metropolitan College. The third one, because the second one has to do with the case of Metropolitan College, the third one has to do with the challenges and lessons that we have learned throughout this partnership. And the fourth one, we mentioned that at the beginning, has to do with a new era in Greece, a new law in Greece, and how we perceive all those changes. So it's glad that we have today partners, the oldest partner and the biggest partner, and 2 other partners with great potential. So I will start with Daniela Kobeltin, Head of Global Partnerships at Oxford Brookes University. And then we have, of course, Professor Koula Simakopoulou, Dean of Research and Knowledge Exchange, Faculty of Health Science and Technology at Oxford Brookes University. Also, we have with us Dr. Gulnara Stovern, Director of Global Campus at the University of East London. Fotis Papageorgiou, Professor Fotis Papageorgiou, Deputy Principal Academic Affairs at Metropolitan College, and also Professor Richard Butt, Deputy Principal and Deputy Vice Chancellor at Queen Margaret University. So, first, I would say, not question, but a statement from all of you. How do you perceive, from your side, the collaboration with Metropolitan College? What are the highlights from that partnership? We can start with
this way, okay.
With you. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll start us off. I suppose I'll focus on some of those key points in terms of what actually constitutes a successful partnership. And some of those things we've already heard repeated by colleagues, both in terms of T&E 3.0 and also in terms of the emerging trends. So I think for us, what makes a successful partnership is the point around equity, the point around embeddedness, and what I mean here is working relationships and also how integrated the spheres of working are. So that's going beyond academic delivery of programs and simple educational exports. That goes both in terms of curriculum co-creation, which is another one of those points that's been mentioned earlier, and it's also different types of activities. It's mobility, it's research, which I'm sure you'll hear about later, and finally, it's strategic fit and vision and mission. If 2 partners can work towards the same goal, that helps us in terms of achieving that goal, and it means we're working jointly as equal partners. And for Metropolitan College and for Oxford Brookes, that's such a perfect example. We are both employability focused. We care about both a student-centric approach and students are very much at the center of what we do as universities in the UK, and I think I probably speak for all partners here. And it's very much what makes Metropolitan College special in terms of its delivery. It's caring about the student experience and the relevance of that educational offering, because we take our cues from you as the experts in country. And it is very much an equitable partnership. Piers earlier mentioned the QAA TNE enhancement scheme, and some of Metropolitan College's partners, including Oxford Brookes, took part of that. It's a voluntary scheme. But one of the things that was especially commended as part of that review was the point around equity, curriculum co-creation, strong governance. That is success, if I ever saw one. So from our point of view, it's these 3 points that we really align well with. We don't just offer our Oxford Brookes degrees designed for our Oxford-based students in Greece. We work together to design a curriculum that fits your market needs in Greece, so that students can be successfully both locally and internationally. And we work together as equal partners. And we very much look towards the future and the establishment of legal entities. And again, that feeds into that point around embeddedness and working in an integrated way. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll be very brief, because Daniela covered all of the points I was going to say. I think speaking to this equality of partnership, for me, goes the other way around. So it's embedded in a situation where Brookes also changes the way we do things, because we have learned from our partner. So it is not just about a kind of a relationship where we're both equals, because for me, equality is that it's not kind of we're both on the same stage. There has to be a reciprocal relationship. And I can tell you that my teams back at Brookes, at Brookes, we often talk about how you guys do things here, and then we look up to how you do things here, and we change our practice at Brookes because of how you do things here. So we're a partnership where we have really evolved together, and your influence is actually coming back to us. And to me, that is a true collegiate collaborative partnership.
Okay, thank you. So we have the view of Oxford Brookes University. Let's go to University of East London.
East London, yes. Thank you. Well, it is difficult to speak after Danielle has pretty much listed many things, but thank you, Danielle. But what I would like to say, which Danielle hasn't mentioned, in our particular case, as again, multiple times it's been repeated, we're not the oldest partnership. However, it is one of the, I think for University of East London, Metropolitan College is the oldest partnership out of all the ones 30 plus that we have. And your question, Vangelis, was what is it that you value the most or treasure about partnership? And I'm going to give a very, very simple answer. I'm going to say people. And when I say people, I don't mean just the colleagues who are here sitting, amongst ourselves. For us, there are people who work with us. They're actually people who we work with every day. Because of so many years, we managed to build this trust, and to build this trust in their, not just a partner, but in certain people who've been at Metropolitan College for many, many years. And to be honest, we often use Metropolitan College as an example to our other partnerships around the world, saying, well, this is the partner who often does things way better than we do at a university. And again, this is not confidential, and we often, when we have meetings, when we come here to Athens or colleagues visit us in London, we say, we want to learn from you from many ways, student experience, some of the things you do in Greece, you probably do it better than us. So this is when I said the trust and the people, the colleagues we work with. However, I would also like to say the students, and when I say students, I don't mean the 5,000 plus human beings. I actually mean these are our UEL students who happen to study UEL degrees in Greece. They all have UEL student ID. They all have UEL related email addresses. These are our students who study in a much better climate. And also, I guess one last thing I'll mention, not to take too much time, is, well, Danielle, you kind of, I even made a point here where you said vision and mission. What I would also add to that, the commonality are the values. I believe that the student body, those student human beings who study at UEL in London and at Metropolitan College on UL programs are very, very similar, the type of the student, and I think that relates us even more because we know how to do and what to do with these type of students who may have not succeeded in a Red Briggs Russell, I was going to say Russell Group universities potentially, because they have a very, very different demographic. And again, I talked about it yesterday. But we know how to work and what to do with this type of student body within this environment to make them succeed at the end of their journey.
Thank you. Otis?
Well, very little to add, actually, but I would say that the key is, of course, perfect balance between quality and quantity. And if I could summarize the two values that are most important in successful T&E partnerships and the ones that we've been enjoying with our partners in the UK, is our trust and boldness, right? So it's very important for the partners to trust each other, understand each other's perspectives, but at the same time, be ready to break new ground. And I have multiple examples from all our partners where we broke new ground. I mean, Oxford Brookes, we offered the first MA in creative writing. With UEL, the first program in aviation. With Queen Margaret, the first program in podiatry. I could list Solent's Maritime Academy at this ground. These were all very complex projects, inviting a lot of commitment from both parties. And yet we did it because we had the trust and boldness, both partners, to do that.
Thank you, Foti. What is the view of Queen Margaret University?
Yes, I mean, well, obviously, I would sort of agree with everything colleagues have said so far, and maybe just kind of say a bit more about some of the points that have been made. So, Gulnara's point about relationships being absolutely sort of central, and as Gulnara said, these are relationships not just between the kind of, the sort of vice chancellor and principal, or between your kind of head of international and your kind of sort of equivalent, but relationships between program leaders, at the two partners, and these aren't transactional. These are kind of sort of genuine relations. I think that's been absolutely key. I mean, it's I was just talking to sort of Magda earlier from kind of mass communication, who I've known for kind of since a long time. I started working with kind of sort of Metropolitan College, sort of way back in the early 2000s. So they are, I would say, they're often, when you're looking at something of this sort of scale, those kind of personal relationships are often overlooked. But I would say that they're absolutely central, and I think they've been key in recent sort of discussions around the ULE application as well. For instance, that there is that long history of these personal relationships. Trust is always a slightly dangerous word when it comes to talking with the Quality Assurance Agency. What you can't say is, well, no, it's all fine because we trust our partners. I mean, it absolutely is the case that we trust our partners, but that's not a satisfactory response, understandably, from the QAA point of view. So I think a measure of our success, if you were to take an external benchmark, our success being our partnership success, is when in the 2015 QAA report on transnational educational partnerships in Greece and in Cyprus, they referred to the fact that the student voice at Metropolitan College was not only listened to, but it was also acted on. And they say, and that is a mark of a kind of, a strong and positive student experience. So seeing that, it's an external benchmark of a kind of successful program when you've got the QAA using very UK measures of what counts as quality assurance and quality enhancement to talk about what's happening at our partners.
Yeah, thank you. What I understand from your view on this first question is that we have a two-way partnership, a two-way relationship, and not just one way. And when I say one way, is that, okay, of course, the program belongs to the university. However, the way that we deliver each program is what we try to do together for the student experience, which is important. And also has to do with what we can exchange from that experience all together for your students as well, in the main campus, but at the same time also for the faculty members. Richard, I mentioned before that QMU, the partnership with Queen Margaret University, is the oldest one. So I'd like to hear from you what are these changes throughout the years from the starting point of that collaboration with Metropolitan College and where we are today?
Thanks. Well, I was kind of reflecting on this, and the starting point is possibly the kind of the most counterintuitive starting point you would imagine for a TNE partnership, and indeed for where we are now. In that we started with logopedics, so kind of speech therapy from a kind of UK perspective. Aside from costume design and construction, easily the smallest program that we have at the university. And probably at that point, the program with the kind of highest required entry levels, it's a kind of small cohort. At that point, well, I think we still are only one of two providers of speech therapy education at university level in Scotland. So that's, because you would think finance, business management, they would be the obvious places. But in fact, it was kind of sort of logopedics. So we started with that one program, and a challenging program because you're not only dealing with, it was delivered, at that point it was delivered and assessed entirely in English. Most of the literature that's available is in English as well. So there's immediately a challenge for students and staff where kind of English isn't their first language, that they're dealing with not only something that's in another language, but that is something that's highly technical in terms of its approach to language itself. That kind of deep understanding that you need of phonetics and speech production, et cetera, in the second language. But we started there, and we've all ended here. I mean, so that is a phenomenal sort of journey, from the first discussions in sort of 2000. Mass communication kind of followed kind of swiftly afterwards, and that was sort of my involvement, just a kind of a couple of years later. And then, yeah, kind of like others, we have kind of grown the provision throughout that period. So yes, you could say, what's changed? Yes, the kind of the scale in terms of student numbers, the number of programs, the number of campuses at which the programs are offered. A fundamental change, but it didn't happen in full until 2016. Was to provision being entirely, the programs being taught and assessed in Greek. So that, we had for a number of years a kind of, first 2 years were in Greek, and then the final 2 years were in English. But it was really after the 2015 QAA report where they referred to successful models of programs being taught and assessed in Greek that gave us the confidence that there was a way of kind of managing the kind of quality assurance aspects of the program and delivering, having everything, the entire programs delivered and assessed in Greek. So that was certainly a significant, that's sort of some 15 years into the relationship. I think the other marker of the change in the relationship is that now, when Metropolitan College come to us and say, well, we're kind of sort of interested in this, in this area of adding this area of provision, say radiography, as a new potential area of provision to kind of expand the suite of health sciences. Our reaction now is, how can we make that happen? That's the sort of first response. I think previously, if you go back 20 years, there was probably always a nervousness about, well, how are we going to manage the kind of the potential risk to quality assurance? Not because we had any concerns about Metropolitan College, but TNE, sort of 20 years ago, particularly then sort of, TNE delivered in another language, was relatively new to the, I know we heard how, University of London had TNE partnerships, but the sort of TNE we're all involved in, it's really a kind of, it's really the last, well, I say the last 25 years, that's showing my age, that's kind of relatively recent. But it is a relatively recent, so, and your heads of quality assurance and enhancement in our own institutions will be risk averse. They know that when it comes to kind of institutional reviews of quality, there will be a spotlight on how do you manage your provision over there at a distance in a meaningful way, and ensuring all the things that we heard sort of earlier. So I think a mark of the distance that we've come is that the immediate response now is always, how can we make that happen? And also us proactively saying, look, we're planning on delivering in this new area. Would you be interested in expanding? So they for me are kind of, markers of that journey. There's a lot more, obviously over a 25 period. And I suppose my final point is the way in which Metropolitan College now looks like a UK university. Yeah. In its structure, in its governance, in its approach, and as everyone has said, the extent to which we now learn as much from you as you learn from us.
Thank you. And you mentioned about the program, the first program, the Logopedics, which, if I'm not mistaken, was the first partnership that a college in Greece had with another partner from UK. So let's move to Gulnara, because you know we have the oldest partner, but also we have the biggest one. So what are the elements that can provide in all those years that kind of success, related, of course, the number of students.
Yes.
Of course, the quality of education at the same time, but, you know, we deal with numbers every day, with data. So data here is specific. I mean, it says something very important, that we have a great number, a big number, a huge number of students. So what are the elements?
Okay, I just wanted to, almost the first question was to Richard, but when he talked about their relationship and their partnership with Metropolitan College, I also wanted to jump in the very end and say the word maturity. And I think the word maturity is very much about, certainly about our relationship with Metropolitan College, because we as an institution, I wasn't there when the partnership was established. My current vice chancellor wasn't there. My current immediate boss or pro-vice chancellor, none of us were there. So we walked into this particular relationship, which has always been the biggest for ourselves and the oldest for ourselves, a bit immature. And again, I'm not afraid to say that. We were experienced professionals in many areas. But to be very honest, I remember our very first calls when Dinos and Dimitris were present, and because they've already been at Metropolitan College for many years, and we were the newbies. And I remember, I think we used to have monthly calls of senior management, of our senior management at Metropolitan College, because we were very much in this kind of touch and feel situation, albeit virtual, trying to understand each other, trying to learn to work together. Most of this was colleagues here telling us off that we were doing something wrong or we were not doing something right. And that's fine, because it's taken less than a year for us as management of all our UEL partnerships to actually kind of understand the specifics of the partner, specifics of the country, the volume and the value of the partnership. So this word maturity, I feel much more mature in partnership management, and I'm sure the same applies to my colleagues who are in my team and who are kind of about, and we don't need the senior management meetings on a monthly basis. We didn't need them for many years. Our colleagues, relevant colleagues, meet with each other, and when you, Evangel, specifically asking about elements, again, I think this institutional maturity in partnership management is definitely one of the key and core elements. And when Richard just said about, you know, what is a TNE, you know, provision, there's University of London who had it, and there's us. And again, I mentioned yesterday, when I started at a university, we had about 6,000 transnational education type of students around the world. We're at 25,000 now. More than 5,000 of those 25, so more than a fifth, or 20%, are Metropolitan College, and we will continue to grow. We will continue to add the new courses. Again, very situation from yesterday evening when we had our individual meetings with universities with Metropolitan College. I was there with Fotis and Tina. To be honest, we didn't have that much to talk about, apart from some of the operational things. And again, I had to clarify some deadlines, etc. And Tina Zoe says to me, Gulnara, you know how we need to submit this course schedule every year? Yes, to your Ministry of Education here, yes. Gulnara, can you please tell your colleagues to start working on it this year, because there's always a bit of kind of, you know, back and forth, etc. And in my thinking, well, you just take the last year's course schedule, you just cross-check it, make sure tick the box. But then obviously we have to add new programs. And that is amazing, because the new programs means new opportunities, means new students, and again, means growth. And I'm not just talking the growth of, as I say, FTEs of students, but also growth of the partnership and growth of the relationship. It is not a secret from anyone here that when the application for ULE went, was it last week now? We were extremely nervous about the first list of programs that was proposed for our university. We were at the borderline, I wouldn't want to use the word offended, but we were confused. We're like, oh my gosh, we have, in every single presentation, we say we have 50 plus programs. It's actually 60 plus if you separate some of those with placement, without placement, etc. And they're proposing 11. What about our MBA? What about this program? There were some really, really difficult discussions. But again, that's absolutely fine. And we take them with a level of maturity we now have. We have this trust. There'll be another iteration. We will continue our partnership. We'll continue developing. We'll submit more programs. So that all kind of contributes. I'll stop here.
I think that maturity is a critical word, because maturity involves not only decision in a high level ranking of how we deal with the decisions in the future, but also day-to-day work,
yes.
How faculty perceive that kind of partnership, students, local society,
community.
I would say families. So yeah, maturity is important. For this, what are the good practices that Metropolitan College has followed throughout the years in order to be here today and to talk about that case study?
If you allow me, I will not just mention Metropolitan College, because I was extremely privileged and lucky to have served TNE in 2 countries, so that would be Greece and Germany, and even more likely so in the market leaders in both countries. So both Metropolitan College and Global University Systems, which I served in Germany, actually hold a share of more than 50% in their respective local markets. Now, and it was also extreme good luck that I joined those institutions in their moment of extreme growth. So where I've seen other institutions falter and get things wrong, Metropolitan College has been a prime example of doing things right. And if I were to summarize what we did very well, is to have a very good management team. Why say that? It's very important to have a management team that clearly and timely perceives the differing and sometimes conflicting perspectives of the stakeholders that it serves, right? So, and that is flexible enough, right, resilient enough sometimes to achieve the best possible conciliation. This is very important. This is vital for transnational education. Let's look at the stakeholders. Right? First of all, we have the partner university. You cannot do successful transnational education if you do not understand what is very important and valuable for the partner university. Then you have the shareholder. Again, it's really important to understand the shareholder's perspective. Remember that there is no, as opposed to public universities, there is no magic safety net that will save the institution apart from the shareholder. So that's a very important perspective to always keep in mind. Then we have students and faculty, of course, and then the local industry, local community, the professional staff administration, not to mention professional statutory and regulatory bodies. Now, what has made Metropolitan College be set apart is not just understanding the perspectives, but be ready to respond when things go south across all those stakeholders. Right? So, just to roll back like 10 years ago, we had the capital controls imposed in Greece. Then we had Brexit, and then we had the pandemic, and now we have this new law. There's constant changes, right? That may deter other institutions, but they certainly have not deterred Metropolitan College. The latest example, the new law inviting the establishment of branch universities in Greece is a very good example. Comparing to Germany now, so you know that in Germany is a federal state, which means that every state has its own higher education act. Now, the law specifying how a non-German university can set up its campus in Germany, could you venture how many words it is? Anyone from the panel? Sorry? Right? So just to keep in mind that the Greek legislation now stretches over 10,000 words. Right? Now the German equivalent is 200 words. So it's so the way I think about it, and you know, the fact that we submitted 3 applications already in such a challenging and difficult environment is just amazing. So that is what I particularly find, you know, driving, being, you know, a great supporter of the success of Metropolitan College. When I joined, like more than 10 years ago, I think, of course, it was Dimitris that had taken the lead in hiring like people that could fit this institutional perspective. And I think that the majority of the people that we see here today were hired between 2012 and 2015, and have, you know, the team spirit that has guided us ever since, and identified by this shared understanding of the stakeholders that we serve. I think this is what had made a fantastic contribution to Metropolitan College success.
Thank you, Foti. I mentioned before that we have also 2 other partners. We collaborate with 2 other partners at Metropolitan College, Oxford Brookes University and Southampton Solent University. So I'd like to hear your view as Oxford Brookes University about the strategy that you follow in order to be able to enhance that partnership with Metropolitan College.
Sure. I've listened with great interest what colleagues have said, and really the strategies in what everybody else has said. So we see this relationship as one that is guided by the principles of honesty and boldness. So like other partners, we wouldn't feel nervous about you coming across and saying you want to develop more programs, because we have matured together, we have traveled the journey together, we have made mistakes together. You know, I don't think there's anyone sitting in this room who has lived through life perfectly. Oh yeah, maybe one of you. but you know, this is how we learn. And talking about mistakes as this, you know, terrible opportunities that kind of bring a partnership down, for example, I think that's dreadful. That's where we all grow out of, right? We grow out of getting things wrong, but having the correct approach to getting things right again. So the boldness and the honesty and the trust and the preparedness to respond and the agility in our relationship, to me, are absolutely key of the overarching strategy. So I will let Daniela talk about the specifics of the strategy. But if you think about if you think about a car and the major components that keep it going, to me, it's those values, and also the culture within which the institutions work. You know, there are great working environments and there are some toxic working environments. And what you mentioned earlier about the culture here is one of collaboration. It's one where we know you're looked after, where we know we're looked after, and we can, you know, look after people. People who are looked after well can work well together. So it's very much about the culture that Dimitris has created in this institution, and which will be carried forward, that actually enables successful partnerships to go through.
I'll add just 1 or 2 brief points. In terms of strategic direction that we take at Brookes in terms of transnational education, we don't want to conquer the world. We know where we want to be. We don't want to have 1 million small partners just for the sake of being in a great number of territories. We want to work with key strategic valued partners in a very embedded, integrated way. And this is very much the type of partnership that we have with Metropolitan College. And related to that, and I absolutely love the term you mentioned around maturity, because I think it's key. In terms of our specific strategy with Metropolitan College, within this broader framework of working in an integrated way, this is about enhancements now. The challenges that we had when we started this partnership back in 2018, 2019, are very different to the ones that we have now. It was all about teething problems at that point. How do we set things up? How do we work together? How do we manage quality with delivery in Greek, that's already been mentioned. And now it's about how can we make sure that students have a better experience? How can we enhance their employability? And I think it's also reflected in the types of programs that we offer. We may have started with programs that were perhaps a little bit more generic in nature. And now if I think about the portfolio and some of the things that I've heard of here as well, they are so specific. They are catering to specific skills needs that are required in different regions, whether that's maritime or whether that's sports and exercise science or creative writing. And I think it's very much in this spirit that we look at Metropolitan College. How can we make it better? What are the enhancements that we can bring about? And that's in terms of staff development, perhaps through offering joint PhDs, which is something we have done at Brookes, enhancing the way we look at data, and that is one area that I think it's not specific to Greece, it's endemic as a challenge for the entire transnational education sector, and we rely very much on our partners to retain that relationship with our alumni and understand what happens to them once they graduate, and that's an area that we want to improve on. I'll pause here. Thank you.
Angelis, can I just
Yes.
say, just add again, Daniela, you again used the word culture and you referred to Dimitris creating the culture here at Metropolitan College. Can I just add the very interesting, well, I think it's a very interesting point. We all, each and individually, we talked about our relationship with Metropolitan College. However, I absolutely feel that through relationship or through partnership with Metropolitan College, we all here, coming from different UK universities in different geographical areas, well, England and Scotland there, we now feel as we have formed a partnership and we don't hate each other. We actually work very, very well with each other. And again, even this new law, in a way, I mean, we've always known each other for some time. We would meet here at least once a year for academic board. But we haven't had a relationship. But even this new law issuance and the first proposed model of working, which we then abandoned and went for a different one, that's fine. That brought us here closer together, the vice chancellors, the pro-vice chancellors. I think that's also amazing, that through our individual partnerships with Metropolitan College, we within the UK have partnered and started working much better with each other. Not much, I mean, before we didn't work with each other, we now actually have a relationship with each other.
Thank you. Actually, I have prepared a question about the challenges that we have faced during that partnership throughout the years, but I see the title is Shaping the Future, so I will move on to the future perspective by saying, and I would like, because I see the time limitations that we have, so I would like to leave, let's say, 10 minutes for the new law and the new era for Greece. So one final, let's say, question from the previous section is that what components do you think that we can add to our partnership? What new components can we add? You mentioned research, but okay, so I would like briefly to discuss those components in order to see the future and the partnership during the future.
Please, Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one, and it was sort of touched on a bit yesterday, is and you know you can sort of see it in the data that we saw earlier today as well, is the potential for partly through the new legislation and partly through the position that Metropolitan College has, is for it's both for Greece and Metropolitan College to become a genuine international hub in the way that Malaysia and UAE and so on have become. You now have the legislation, you know, that brings that, probably that kind of that university legal entity kind of, you know, sort of brand will kind of, you know, will overcome a kind of, you know, a sort of conceptual or perceptual challenge in terms of, you know, as operating as a kind of international hub. You've got the position in the market, you've got the climate, you've got the kind of sort of costs that are that much lower than, say, studying in the UK or the US, and arguably you don't have the same challenges in terms of kind of, you know, sort of international visas, so on and so forth. So I would see a key, you know, Metropolitan College, there's a huge opportunity both for you and for us as your partners in becoming an international hub, both because Greece can now become an international hub, but Metropolitan College, given your preeminent position in there, can really can really capitalize on that. So I think that's one area. I'll leave it to kind of.
Thank you. Lara?
Just to add to what Richard was saying, again, yesterday when we did our introductions, I talked about University of East London hubs around the world. And to be absolutely fair, we've already started talking with Metropolitan College prior to the law, I'd say as early as probably 18, 24 months before, about establishment of UEL, European Hub. And absolutely naturally, it would be here with Metropolitan College. We do have, I think, about 3 or 4 other European partnerships. Obviously, none of them in Greece. There are a couple in Germany, one in Ireland. They're great, they're small, they operate, but this would have been our European hub regardless of the new law. And then the new law was issued, so it almost kind of escalated things for us. So yes, for international hub or global campus, whichever term we're going to apply for this particular in this particular situation. On a lower operational level, I would say specifically for us, we definitely want to increase student mobility, because we apply for Turing scheme every year, we apply successfully, but unfortunately both ways we've sent 1 or 2 students in so many years of partnerships. For us on the kind of, as I said, lower level, we really, really want to make that happen. And it's absolutely natural to do it with our biggest European partner, because we're not geographically that far away from each other. It's very different from sending students to India, and we tried that, and there were some very interesting situations there. But yeah, that's something we really want to add to improve and increase.
Okay. Odi?
Well, I mean, there are 2 versions of the story, right? Including the, let's say, an environment encouraged by regulatory provision. So if regulatory provision actually encourages the host entity, it is much easier to engage in research projects, etc. But most importantly, especially when it comes to internationalization, as Richard mentioned, this is vital because it doesn't have, it's not immediately related to what Metropolitan College and its partners do, but what the government does. So in the EU, for example, an international student can stay with a study with a study-seeking visa for 18 months after they complete their studies. That is a major incentive. It was worked amazingly well in Germany, and France recently has extended this period to 5 years. In Greece, we don't have that, right? So if that limitation were lifted, international students would be very much more interested in coming to Greece. So we have the setup. We have an amazing product and service to offer, but there we need to have the support of the local regulator. But other than that, the ULEs that are now being established offer even more potential for extensive collaboration with the parent universities. So research could just be the beginning.
And that's a great point for me to pick up from.
That's why I gave you.
Oh, we're beautifully coordinated, as always. Absolutely. So to me, you asked what else could happen to strengthen this partnership, and I wouldn't advocate research for the sake of research. I get it that research in itself is not sexy. Innovation and entrepreneurship, however, often rely on good research, and they are the way forward. So what I would like to see is a closer relationship with partners, such as Brooks, for example, where we do support our undergraduates to become entrepreneurs, and you've already started with this work, with your innovation work, to actually come together and really scaffold their development so that when we look at future global leaders in subjects, they're our graduates. So they're not people from the States, they're not people from Russell groups. They're our graduates because they have the potential to do that. They have the agility to do that. And together we have the means to turn that initial interest, support research, support innovation, and then build towards an entrepreneurial spirit. So that's where I think I would love to get more involved in.
Thank you. I think that it's important to mention that one of the key goals at Metropolitan College is employability. And when we talk about employability, we don't we do not talk just the traditional way of employability that, okay, you are capable for public sector or for private sector, but that you gain all these fundamental parts of your personality in order to become a person, an innovator, that you create something new. Okay, last question, or couple questions, if we will have the time, related to the pillar that has to do with the new law, the new era in Greece. So my main question has to do about what are the benefits of this new era in Greece according to the new law. What are the benefits? Richard?
I suppose there's parity of esteem. So in terms of for the college, in relation to the public universities, and that so getting. I mean, that'll take some time, but I think that's got to be a key benefit, both in terms of student recruitment, but also students' employability. We know that kind of employers will look at that the fact that you've got kind of sort of UK kind of sort of university names attached to the sort of institution. So I think that's one finally achieving that long overdue, and it's not a reflection of the kind of it's more just that's the nature of environment. So I think that's got to be key, and then it ensures a benefit then is kind of protecting your market share from a business point of view that comes with that, and not if you like sort of being left behind. For us, and this may be true for some of the programs of some of our partners as well, professional recognition of the kind of of the rights of a number of our graduates on nursing and midwifery and on other programs. So that's for students, for us, and for Metropolitan College, that's absolutely key that parity includes that professional recognition, and finally gets us over that terrible kind of kind of Brexit fallout that nobody asked for in relation to what would happen with those harmonised professions in particular. But I'll let other colleagues speak about other areas.
I couldn't agree more. So it's definitely securing the professional and academic rights of our students that is very important. Remember that in Greece, ideological hegemony rests with public universities, and this always results in private institutions suffer from, let's say, reputation deficit, which is so unfair to Metropolitan College. So it is always quite weird to be working in an institution that is so extensively accredited internationally, that has qualifications and awards that are just phenomenal, and have to work within this adverse environment all the time. But there's also a benefit, not just to the institution and students, but also to the local industry, to the local higher education industry, because it could really increase its international aspect, right? Bring international best practices into the Greek higher education system. That is something that I firmly believe in.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I won't have much to add. I think between Richard and Fotis, they've covered everything. But I guess my reply is going to be in a form of a question to all of us, or any of us. Do you think, again, when Fotis, you spoke about professional recognition, so that the college students occasionally or sometimes kind of looked at almost like graduates, I mean, like second-class citizens. When, I'm not going to say if, I'm going to say when the university legal entities are established and start operating like, well, I was going to say like a university, it will be a university. Do you think in the society, amongst employers, there would still be, well, yes, it's a university, but do you think it will take a number of years to overcome that, or you don't see that as an obstacle at all? What do you I know we can't predict the future, but what do you think from being here and working here?
It will definitely boost the recognition potential. But let me just state that our graduates actually, help reverse this common opinion, conception, all right? Because they're actually doing very well at their works. They're
once they get the jobs, the question is if it's ever been an obstacle for them to apply to an employer against somebody coming from Athens State University, for example? I'm sure once they're in there, they absolutely perform brilliantly.
Well, the answer is absolutely yes, right? Because they will have an official university education recognized as university education in Greece. So that is fundamental, of course.
And I think to your question has to do with the maturity that you mentioned before. I think the Greek society right now is enough mature to understand that graduates from Metropolitan College right now, without knowing the new era,
yes,
they're employable, they are capable, and they have a great potential. This is something that has changed throughout the years. But of course, always a change can provide an enhancement to everything that we talk today. Your views about the benefits?
Happy
to go?
Yeah, happy to pick this one up.
Okay.
Thanks. I see the new legislation as a framework. Of course, the devil will be in the detail, and we don't quite know the full picture of the implementation. However, it can be an engine for change where some of those joint ambitions that we've already had can help to be realized. For example, the college has had an ambition to recruit internationally for some time, but it's helping us see how can we work together to drive that change. How can we, for example, encourage Greek students to study more in English so that we can attract students internationally and be part of the same cohorts? TNE students from the region or from further afield won't want to be part of segregated cohorts, for example. So that's a point that we can think about together, one of those challenges for us to explore. So it can be one of those, and it's also an opportunity for the college and for the university partners to think about ways to be disruptors and to do things differently. How can we think about more modes of delivery? I mean, we're already doing that in some form, and COVID has helped us get there in a very organic way. Distance learning programs, blended delivery. The law can help us think big, but it shouldn't be a straitjacket either. We can have ambitions with or without the law. So it's a helpful framework to help us consider what we can do in the future, and we touched on that previously. But I suppose we won't stop wanting to innovate together, regardless of what the legislation might say.
Thank you.
And I think, I think for institutions that aren't doing things right, the law could be a problem. But for Metropolitan College, it's a great opportunity because you're already doing amazing things. So what I think will happen is the law will enable you to be able to shine about them and get this equity in partnership and relationship. I think Greek society might need a bit of a helping hand because reputations are well embedded in our culture and they do take time to change. But you're aware of that. You're already working towards that. And the graduates from here go out and tell your story. So the behaviors that they exhibit will go a long way towards changing society's perception about privately educated people. But I think it's a great opportunity. I think it's a win-win. Yes, putting in the lengthy applications. I'm sure you could have all lived without all of that. But now you know how to do it, right? So the next wave will be so much easier. So I think it's a great opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Before closing, any comments or questions from the audience? Professor Akoumanis.
Oh, the microphone.
Yep. Just for people that are watching us from YouTube.
Some 30 years before the letters TNE were widely known, we were considering the success of internationalization first in terms of number of exchange students, then exchange of staff, of academic staff, and then we extended this to exchange of professional staff. That's how we're defining the success of internationalization. Now, looking at you and hearing about all this positive things, I would like to challenge you. Why, after so many years, there are so few students attending a year abroad?
I was just saying.
There is no excuse for that, I have to say. This is the simplest way, the most economical way, because if you say, yes, Greek students, why they don't come to study abroad? It's financial. Those who can will go. So I would like to challenge the success of the partnership in terms of the student numbers that will spend a year abroad. I'm not talking about semester for practical reasons, but a year abroad is the best way to enhance the value of the degree, to gain experience, to feel colleagues in different countries. All are positives. So a challenge to all of you to do that.
Thank you. Well, exactly what I was talking about.
Exactly.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Dinas, if I may say, I have, Dinas, I personally have a KPI set by my Vice Chancellor, a KPI of number of students realizing student mobility. I can only comment, again, I can only speak obviously on behalf of our university. When you said a year, not a semester, the specifics of only our university student body, the vast majority of London-based students are mature students with families and children. And that is, for us, is the main obstacle. We were actually delighted, and I'm sure colleagues will join me, that from 25-26 next academic year, Turing scheme has the opposite. It's been shortened. For now, it's 4 weeks minimum. From next academic year, it's becoming 2 weeks minimum for student exchange. We're actually delighted. I know it's awfully short, but that means for us, we will be able to give study abroad opportunity to far more students, because at the moment, our biggest obstacle is the type of students that study at UEL in London. For them, it's genuinely very, I mean, it'd be extremely hard for me now to go away anywhere from my family for a year. So, yeah.
Well, we always welcome students from your universities here in Greece to spend great time, at the same time to have a great experience. And it's important for us to find that scheme that will be successful. Final comment.
I think we can all say very nice words, and we can all come up with reasons why it hasn't happened yet. But I think Professor Akmanis makes a very valuable point, and I think the challenge is accepted, and we will make sure we listen like good partners and actually do something about it. You acknowledge a very true problem. I completely agree with you. You know, there's no point in talking the nice words if we don't do this, and that is really important. So thank you.
So to sum up, a few main words: equity. We talk about maturity. We talked about employability, facts for our students, entrepreneurship mindset, innovation,
culture.
Research, culture, yeah.
Trust.
International students, exchange from partner universities here in Greece, and other opportunities for the new era. And thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you. So we move on, I'm assuming, to the most interesting part, the lunch.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oops.
Members of the panel, so they don't need any introduction. This time, I would prefer not to ask specifically, to ask the question. I expect who is going to rush to answer, but it's a question for all of you, and simply the person who feels closer to the topic can start, and the rest can. And because it is an important topic, and I wouldn't like to leave it for the end, I will start with a more general type of question. Are there any forms of transnational education globally which offer promise to replace the conventional franchise validation model that dominates Europe? So I'm talking globally, and I know somebody to my right immediately close to me who is dealing with issues like this in order to provoke the discussion from the rest of us.
You want me to prove provocative?
Oh, of course.
Oh,
We're ready to be provoked.
Have I ever been provocative?
No.
Never. No. So thank you very much for joining. This is the nicest session, right? So everybody who was here for a free lunch has left now. And those are the people who are really, really interested in transnational education. That's really good. So we are amongst ourselves now, and a few other people. So it's really great. Yeah. So absolutely, look, transnational education is a fascinating topic from my perspective. I think it was 2003, I was asked by the European Association for International Educators to write a discussion paper. And I decided to give that a provocative title. And I called it the Multinational University, right? And the multinational university is about a university which doesn't actually define itself anymore just in the national system, but actually sees itself as a global player and operates around the world. Franchising, validation, but also branch campuses, online, etc., etc. And obviously, the title got a bit of a pushback because multinational in those days were not always very well regarded. Right? This was a bit of a title which some people had problems with. It's too commercial, and education is not commercial, right? Well, it's interesting when I now look back at that little publication of 2003 and see where we are with transnational education. What a journey, especially in the UK, what a journey we have made. It's no longer just a little extra. It is very much part of the core business. It's mainstream for many, many universities. In fact, the number of students on transnational programs in the UK is now more or less the same as the students coming into the UK. Now, even I would not have been able to predict that. I mean, even I would have said that's far from credible. That's the reality. It is very much part of mainstream UK higher education. At the global level, it's a different story. But UK universities are really perfectly set up to engage in transnational education because the way the higher education is actually the difference between a state-funded university and a self-financing university, a private and public, etc., is very, very marginal. All universities are under pressure to make their own money. They have certain levels of freedom, much more than other countries. So I, as some of you know, I also work in Germany and all over the world, but also in Germany, much more complicated because you're under a ministry, and the ministry will define that as you serve the purpose, even as a private provider, of a domestic interest. So this is a very interesting how UK and up to a certain extent also Australia, etc., certainly up to a certain extent Australia and so on, have really taken advantage of the fact they have a different higher education system. T&E is now a core business. From the point you're referring other systems, yes, when I made the real big step from generating income from our university to going into the private sector myself, I turned it upside down. So I didn't look at it anymore from the university perspective, but I looked at it from where do we want to be in the end. The same way as nation states look at where we want to be, I said, where do we want to be at the global level? Globalization is a reality. So it's more than just send a student abroad and experience a little bit from abroad and go back and that's it. No, globalization actually in higher education is mainstream. Universities are becoming more multinational. So how would the world look like for higher education if you look at the other way around and you look at it from a global level? And that, of course, became global university systems. Recently, I was asked to quickly explain. I said, it's very simple. I always worked with a tree, and I nurtured the tree, and I wanted the tree to grow, and I wanted the tree to be the highest tree possible. Now, I don't look so much at the tree anymore. I look at the forest. It's a global forest. It's an ecosystem which is very diverse, which has our own institutions. We have something like 30 higher education institutions ourselves which operate, but also partner institutions. We don't make that distinction anymore. So in the global university system setup, we look at the forest. We create a global forest of institutions which all are different and have something to contribute, our own as well as our partner institutions. And as a consequence, you then actually don't make that clear distinction anymore. What is your domestic agenda and what is your international agenda? Because that tree isn't just serving a national agenda. No, all our institutions automatically replicate, scale up, the same as what we are trying to do for our partner institutions. So it's a completely different way of looking at it. Stop making the distinction between transnational and national, because actually there isn't a distinction. It's the same. You have, as a university, a task in educating, but in the context of that global forest.
But I want to hear something that you haven't mentioned. Student recruitment. This is something that you have innovated and you are keeping it secret.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I didn't mention it.
And that's why I want you to say something.
Yeah, of course. You can say, okay, what's the big difference? What makes us grow? We've grown in the last 10 plus years from maybe 10,000 students. I can't remember where we were when I joined, to at the moment something like 130,000 students. And that's just in our own institutions. I'm not even talking about the partner institutions. So yeah, that's a huge growth. And why? Because we have an economies of scale. And the economies of scale is especially when it comes to student recruitment, because that's a very expensive hobby. Right? It's not easy to attract students. Now, we are good at that because, one, we do not recruit a student to a course or a student to a university. We recruit a student, whatever they actually is suitable for that student. So wherever they want to go, what kind of institution, what is their academic background. Plus, of course, we have an army of recruiters. And when I say an army, I'm talking certainly more than 1,000 people or something, mainly based in our back offices in India and Philippines and so on, because we have the economies of scale. We do that for our own institution, but also for the partners.
With exclusivity rights to those agents?
Not exclusivity, but obviously when you represent so many opportunities, agents have, let's say, a little bit of a different relationship than when you're just a institution trying to get some students. For agents, we are a very powerful. So agents need to be approved by us, right? So they have to register with a portal and so on. If they don't stick to the code or they don't have a track record, we do not use them. So for agents, they have to be very careful. If they're not part of us, that actually exclude quite a big, you got clout basically, right? In the discussions. But we don't just use agents. We also do direct recruitment. It's kind of 50-50. So we also have our own recruitment channels. But yeah, it's definitely a point. The bigger you get, of course, the more easier it becomes to become bigger and bigger and bigger. That's the secret of the success. Yes.
Now that we know one of the secrets of success, you managed to get it out of you. I managed. Would you like Paul to add something?
Yeah. Can I just pick up on one of the points you made before I say what I was going to say, and that is you hit on the point of the way that universities in the UK are set up, and the way that gives them an advantage in terms of doing entrepreneurial things like transnational education. And it's an interesting one because it's not always understood in the UK. There are many people in the UK who think UK universities are part of the public sector, whereas, of course, the state doesn't own universities. It doesn't have any civil servants in the universities. We don't report to a minister in universities, and a minority of our funding comes from the state in universities. So it's not surprising we can be a lot more entrepreneurial, and we're not part of the public sector, despite what people think. Anyway, the thing that strikes me about the current model and the sort of thing we have here is it really is a simulation of a typical university experience, insofar as the students come in, they're taught, they do their exams, they qualify. The main difference is they get a degree from another university. Now, that works really well, as we've seen, but it is very expensive. It's a very expensive option, not least because you have to build all the buildings, and they are very expensive. particularly in the centre of Athens. And also, they're increasingly less likely to fit some aspects of Generation Z who we're seeing who are coming through. Those who want an ever more personalised experience, who perhaps don't want to come and mingle every day with students. They want to spend more time at home online. They want something that is a lot more flexible and is a lot cheaper. And there's a university in Germany that Moritz and I we were talking about the other day that is a really interesting example of another sort of model. And that's the International University in Germany. It's got 150,000 students. It's grown by 50% in the past 3 years, so phenomenal growth. And what it's based on is offering a very personalised experience with AI. And AI is at the front end of everything they do. Many of you will know they won the EdTech Awards last year for Cynthia, their AI tutor. So again, it provides a very personalised experience, but around an online offering. And that's got them into a bit of difficulty, I think it's fair to say, as Moritz and I were talking, in Germany, because of course, if you offer that experience with everything that's geared with it, you don't get very good student progression. You know, you can recruit a lot of students, but they might not graduate at the end. In fact, probably quite a lot won't. So what they've done is they've gone overseas. So they've bought institutions overseas. The first one was University of Fredericton in Canada, and then the London Institute of Banking and Finance in London, which changed its name to the Walbrook Institute on Wednesday. And so what they're offering is this very high-tech AI-facilitated provision that's very attractive to a particular generation of students, but also providing a bit of campus experience as well. So the students can spend some time on campus. It's not 5 days, it's not 4 days, it's probably 1 day a fortnight. But it gives them that motivation and that they can do tutorials and practicals and so on. And it gives them a bit of an esprit de corps, perhaps not very much. But that's a different sort of model again. And it may work, it may not. There's one thing that I'm very aware of. It's very reliant on venture capital. Because to get the AI up and running when AI is changing every 5 minutes and to keep it up to date has proved to be phenomenally expensive.
And what I'm realizing since you touched on AI, I was in a conference on Friday, the cost of electricity, of energy, the cost of water, and the cost of equipment is huge. So those who establish like big companies in Greece wanting to come, the initial cost of those, the monthly cost for energy and water are out of an imagination. So, do you want to add? Yes, Trian.
Yes, if I may chime in, just to take a different angle to this question, and I do agree fully with the two colleagues that spoke right before me. I would like to use an adage that it's attributed to a former Secretary of Defense of the United States, Don Rumsfeld. I think it's appropriate because we have a Republican administration again in the US. Don Rumsfeld said what we have is in the world are knowns, unknowns, and knowns and known unknowns. So I think what we have here is knowns, technology, and our colleagues discussed this in a very, very good way, very thorough way. We have consumer and educational preferences and needs also has been very well discussed and thoroughly. Mobility is incredibly important right now, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. You can go anywhere you want, from anywhere you want, in a very, very short period of time, even if we compare ourselves to the pre-COVID era, or especially if we do that with like 10 years ago or so. Then we have unknowns, and to me, the unknown, the big unknown, which is a societal or political or economic unknown, is what will be the next global challenge, which could basically capsize whatever we are projecting right now that will happen. I'm talking about what's the next COVID, SARS, or whatever else it could be. And the known unknown, which we see this in Greece very, very clearly, it's very prevalent, is regulatory regimes, it's regulation, and what regulation does as far as higher education is concerned, and what is the way that regulatory issues or regulatory requirements will evolve in an otherwise globalized world of education, of higher education, and one that AI and technology, as it was mentioned before, is prevalent. So I think these are some things that we should keep in mind. I would like, though, in terms of going to the core, and again, with my different way of answering your question, Professor Arkumanis, to your question in regards to what replaces, I'm not really sure what may replace. However, what I see is there's a trend right now for global internships that have not been mentioned today at all. And I think internships in a different country, starting in one country and going to another country and actually having a meaningful work experience is something that we start seeing more and more. And it's something that it becomes very highly desirable by students as well as universities alike. We see that, for example, here at Metropolitan, we do have an international internship. I mean, we have students coming from the States. We facilitate their intern experience in an English-speaking environment, obviously. And we have significant demand, which is growing, and we can't really meet it very easily. So I would like to throw this in there, partnering with industry and offering internships as part of international mobility, international educational mobility. I believe it will continue to become more and more prevalent in the future because it's very useful.
Thank you. Let me move to not very popular word, Brexit. In the morning, Janet Ilieva showed graphs of T&E trends, but I haven't seen a vertical line Brexit. In order to be able really to compare pre and post, and what was the pace of change after Brexit. Any comments on this?
It's the smile. Well, I think just picking up directly on what you said, actually, the increase, you know, the level of T&E globally has been increasing, and the consumer preferences that were referenced have all been increasing at a remarkable rate, partly also because it's an effective, it's an efficient way of delivering education in places where the demand exceeds what is able to be offered by various countries. I mean, countries are having to scrabble to increase their capability for providing higher education, and this is also a way that supplements that and cuts the way, slightly changes the cost question as well. So there is that. I mean, I'm not trying to avoid your question. It sounds like it, just providing some context. I mean, it's Brexit undeniably has had an effect on, for example, the number of students coming to the UK to study and the ability of them to do so, with the change of the fees status in particular, and that has had impact on people's ability or desire or ease with which they might be able to send people to the UK or come to the UK to study. So I think that is the case. But I mean, here in Greece, using Greece as an example, you know, there is still a lot of interest and a lot of value in UK education, and T&E is a really good way of providing that and ensuring that the provision of UK education can continue beyond that. And I think it's very difficult to say, because we don't have the data, or I don't know that the data exists, and because also for such a long time, I mean, we've provided in Greece TNE provision for over 30 years, and it's been increasingly popular. That the fact that people could not necessarily travel to the UK to attend higher education in institutions, that's always been the case, and therefore we've been able to provide something that offers that. So yeah, I think difficult to say. Obviously, the fee status has had an impact, but TNE provision continues in popularity, which is why it's so important.
Yeah, if you're sitting there in Greece, obviously Brexit had a massive effect insofar as fees were suddenly extremely expensive, and it made UK higher education unaffordable for many people. If you look at the effect on TNE, its effect was remarkably muted. There have been two waves since that have had a much larger effect. And a reasonable question is, well, why is that? You know, you'd expect that there would a downturn in European students and institutions will be thinking about going out there and doing more in terms of TNE. That happened to an extent. There were quite a lot of institutions that set up European partnerships. Not always for straightforward TNE reasons, often were to get a foothold in a country so they could apply for EU research grants. So there were lots of reasons why it was done. But if you look at the overall trend that was going on in TNE, with over half the students going in Southeast Asia, that sort of masks the effect that was happening in Europe. Added to the fact that 2015 coincided with something that was really huge in the UK, in the higher education world, and that was, up until then, the government had a cap on student numbers at an undergraduate level across the board, and it removed that cap in 2015, and everything except medicine. So it had two really dramatic effects that happened virtually instantaneously. You had this move in terms of subjects away from purely academic subjects, notably in the humanities and arts, into the more vocational subjects like business and so on. But the bigger one was the migration within institutions from less prestigious institutions to more prestigious institutions. And it was dramatic. I mean, the university next door to us, King's, it doubled its undergraduate numbers in 3 years, and that's in a constrained site in central London. So the effect within the sector was huge. So it did have an effect within the sector of putting the more prestigious universities off going for TNE, but encouraging those that were teaching orientated and already had a huge amount of experience out there in terms of the UK market in validation and franchising within the UK. So there was a natural tendency to apply overseas. I mentioned the other two waves. The other one obviously was 2019, when the internationalization white paper came out, and that led to a 50% increase in the number of TNE students with all the initiatives around it that you know about. And the third one is much more recent, and it was the change in the visa regulations that made it harder to recruit international students. And that coincided with something much bigger in society. Up until that time, there'd been a sort of collective agreement within society for the past, 20, 30 years, that increasing student numbers was a good thing. Having a broad research base was a good thing. And there was merit in attracting international students. And you maintained all of that by a rather odd form of cross-subsidy between the various things. That collapsed, and it collapsed post-COVID. And so in a very different world now, in where UK universities are having to get smaller and smaller very quickly. If you look at the estimates for this year, we'll lose about 100,000 100,000 academic staff and professional services staff across the sector. Huge number as universities shrink down. Some are responding by going into T&E in ways you wouldn't previously thought, and universities who weren't previously going into T&E or thinking about going into it are now starting to think about it. So that's the third wave. So it was the 2015, a little blip, 2019, quite a big blip, and I think the one we're going to see now is an even bigger one.
Can I support that? Yeah. So it all started with Margaret Thatcher, of course. When Margaret Thatcher introduced the student fees, the assumption was that there would be no international students coming to the UK at all anymore, because why would they suddenly start paying for this, right? But of course, he also cut, in real terms, 25% of the fees for domestic students, I mean income for the universities. So for universities to survive and continue offering a high-quality education, basically getting students who actually were paying fees actually was the only way to maintain the standards, etc. So they had a big stick and a carrot, not intended. I don't think that was a smart move. It just happens like that. Universities are smart organizations. They realize this is the opportunity in order to compensate for the fact that otherwise they got a big problem. And that's why actively they started recruiting international students. Then with Brexit, as Paul rightly pointed out, a similar thing happened, and that is suddenly you lose a lot of European students coming to the UK, you lose your European research funding, etc. So now we got another big problem, and universities again have been acting and engaging in T&E. That's why now you have something like 700,000 students on the T&E programs, as well as 700,000 students still coming to the UK. But it's only a matter of time before T&E becomes the dominant form for universities to engage with the world. So this is, I think, what is you're absolutely right. Where in a perverse way, not an intended way, actually it has stimulated T&E. The other way of looking at it, though, Dinos, is from the other angle. So one thing is what the universities are doing. The other thing is how welcoming are foreign countries to allow you to set up T&E, because there are two to tango here, right? And this is
where I'm coming with the next question.
That's your next question? Okay, I'll answer that one for you. So this is, of course, is happening in the European Union as well. There are countries which basically say, hey, you're no longer a member of the European Union. We lock the door. You're no longer welcome. And that is happening. You got countries which are latent or blatant protectionists. They don't like the idea that foreign providers disrupt the national system. And to be honest, probably most of the world is actually sometimes not even consciously protectionist. So countries do find it a challenge when suddenly foreign providers, backed by private equity, etc., walk into and disrupt. Greece, of course, went the opposite direction, which is very impressive.
That's
exactly your question, right? Yeah, no, I guess that, yeah.
Why Greece? And I'm not talking about Metropolitan College. Why Greece has been so successful in T&E? Let's look at some parameters. In my days back in the UK, Russia, Greece, Cyprus, and China started being the countries with the highest percentage of students in British universities. And there was competition, Russia, Greece, then Cyprus started decreasing, and so on. So British education was well embedded and familiar in Greece. Important factor for T&E. Second, why Greece? How did it play the language issue? Why other countries, Spain and Italy and so on, have been left behind? Interesting that Germany started catching up, but Greece played and the college on behalf of Greece played that language card. Anything else, talking about Greece, because you mentioned regulations. Greece is not a very flexible country in terms of regulations. The concept of colleges has been developed as a midway towards welcoming students and providing foreign education. But it took so many years to reach the stage of this new Greek law, which again, it's an intermediate process towards the change of the constitution. So,
I don't want to dominate this discussion, but there's a but.
I hear that.
And maybe that's the elephant in the room. So far, nobody has discussed the risk side of what's happening in Greece.
Okay.
Right? We all heart-warmed, wow, this is great. We love it. Greece opening up and opening up especially to also British universities is absolutely great news. But there is a risk factor here, let's be honest. So why do countries want foreign providers? One, from political point of view, government point of view, is great. Someone else comes and provides quality higher education, and it doesn't come from your budget, right? So you have a limited budget as a government, but actually now you can increase the provision of good quality by basically getting someone else to pay for it. That's a good trick for a politician to do. Plus, if you can convert that into an international education hub, you get a lot of international students, and as we saw earlier with the calculations of impact, the impact of something like Metropolitan College and so on is huge. When you start bringing in international students, even bigger, multiplier for, wow, lots of jobs being created, all in some ways for nothing.
Because where is the risk? I'm waiting for the risk.
But the elephant here is, you refer to, for instance, language, right?
Yeah.
So when I started in this international world, in the Netherlands, which is also not a widely spoken language, I must say, even less widely than Greek, I introduced English language teaching, right? This is still today a political issue. The current government is pushing back and saying, you should teach in Dutch, not in English. And we do not want all these international students. And that is your elephant in the room. Because you're dependent on politics. Politicians in Canada, in the Netherlands, wherever in the world, it's a part of our democracy. One moment they walk that direction, another moment they walk that direction. So what is, you can say, that's really the political risk of having a friendly government on one moment is not so friendly anymore the next moment, and you got a problem because it's not a tap you can turn on and off. Higher education, either it streams or it doesn't stream, right? So you have to hedge yourself against that political risk. People in the UK know everything what I'm saying, right? And my advice here, in order to tame that elephant a little bit, is the point which was made earlier. Employers. Because you have normally an aligned agenda with your employers. Your employers are engaged in this war of talent. They need people from all over the world to come. And you easily said AI, but great. Where do you get your AI talent? It's not only domestic. You have to get that from abroad. You need smart, young, entrepreneurial people with the right mindset, etc. Employers need them. So you have an alignment, and this is also the Dutch experience recently, where initially the Netherlands government, new right-wing government, said, no, we don't want all these international students, European students, on our public universities. Private, obviously, that's not relevant, but public universities. The employer said, yes, we do. Of course we do. We need them. How can Germany survive without all this foreign talent coming in? America is, I'm not even going to mention America, but this is America's big, Harvard and so on. What percentage of PhD students at American universities is actually born in America? Like it's a single figure, right? So employers are your natural allies to make sure that that political dimension stays a little bit under control, because governments cannot really upset the employers, the big employers, too much.
I'm surprised by your comments about the Netherlands and politicians, because I have been left through you to believe that Netherlands and Germany were following similar paths in higher education.
They did until
and
recently.
now you are telling me that there is a deviation.
Yeah, and this is the politics, and the same in Canada, right? Canada has developed as a major destination for international students. Now suddenly 30% slashed, etc. Right? So this is what happens in politics. It's and we cannot complain about it. It is a democracy. You elect whoever you want to elect. Again, I will not mention America, but this is the where you get these swings, and it will swing back again. Don't get me wrong. But you want stability as a provider, especially as a self-financing provider. You cannot ride that wave. You need to have stability, and therefore you need to find your allies and working together with employers. One, to get that stability, have aligned interest, and secondly, your employability. The point you quite rightly made is super important, especially when you're self-financing. Students here at also Metropolitan College, there's a big investment, big fee, quite different from the public sector, right?
Yeah.
So if you do not see that return on that investment, you've got a big problem. So you are totally dependent on close relationships with the employers.
Yes.
Can I go back to your original question and just underline some points? Because I think that one which you've already mentioned, which I think why Greece and why Greece in the UK, I think, but it's those links which are enormously strong and enormously historic. I mean, we've exchanged students since the 17th century between Greece and the UK in the old universities, and I think that it really plays a part in what you mentioned about the embedding of education, of a UK education, the value of a UK education has played a real part in how willing perhaps some institutions in the UK are to Greece, how willing Greek students are willing to invest in that kind of education here. So that's one thing. There are generations of experience that bear that out. And then the other thing, which I don't think we've mentioned as much, why Greece, is perhaps also because of the system that already operates in Greece that we've been able to build on. So the college system that already exists in Greece and that has facilitated some of those partnerships that we now have here. And also the fact that allows the UK institutions to bring in courses or bring in perhaps more specialized, more niche, slightly different approach courses than are already provided here in Greece by the state sector. And I think that's a bigger difference than it is in the UK.
Now, turning to a side point.
Professor Koumandis, can I just one minute just to add a couple of things that, I mean, I totally agree with everything that was mentioned. Also, in my opinion, there's high regard for Britain as an educational provider in this country and in general around the world. So I think that's also a factor that leads to the success. But I would like to mention also a couple of more things that are specific and unique, in my opinion, to the Greek society. One is that Greeks are entrepreneurs and they're risk takers in general in terms of business. So in this environment of high uncertainty as far as tertiary education, people have taken the risk. They've established organizations like the one we are in right now, despite all the uncertainty, and because of their entrepreneurial spirit, they've been able to be successful. And the second thing, I believe, that it's important here is the expectation and the aspiration of the Greek family. The expectation and the aspiration of the Greek family, which we can explain in all kinds of different ways, is that their child becomes a doctor, a lawyer, not anything else. And I'm saying that with tongue in cheek, really, because obviously being highly educated is a good thing and it's a sign of societal progress, right? Everywhere. But I think Greece has that in a pronounced way. So the things that, and you mentioned regulation before as the first very, very important aspect there, but in a way, colleges are bypassing the closeness of public universities, the public university system, to offer this aspiration for families. And I believe that's also a factor in the success of TNE education.
Just going back, we talked about Brexit, but following this, Britain and Europe, due to the anti-Russian feeling with the war in Ukraine, is closer to Europe than ever before. We see the British Prime Minister attending Brussels, meeting with Macron and everybody else. Do we expect to see any reverse? Any closer ties, enhancing education, facilitating research and so on as a reaction to the war in Ukraine, if this goes on and Mr. Trump is not successful to stop it?
Well, could I put it in a sort of wider context from UK higher education point of view? Well, when you're looking around the world, in terms of who you could partnership with in TNE, there were certain countries that don't share our common values and our history and our culture, and they are, by their very nature, they may be wonderful countries, but they're just that bit harder to work with and to make it work. Whereas one of the great things about Greece is we have a shared history and we have a shared culture and we have shared values in many areas. So it makes it a lot easier to work with Greece if you're looking at it from a UK point of view. Moritz and I, the other day, were talking about the challenges and the pleasures of working in Dubai, for example. It is a very different environment. So I think working not just within Greece, but within Europe as a whole, it's not just a nicer environment, but it's a lower risk environment. And it goes back to the point that was made before about risk. And you'll probably know that the last year, the report that was published, I don't know whether it was British Council or Universities UK, but it was entirely on how UK universities developed sophisticated risk registers in relation to their TNE work. And you have fewer red blobs on your risk register if you're collaborating within Europe.
So returning to the Greek law, the recent law for the establishment of branches, this is in the direction of no risk for our parent institutions, is it? It's a hybrid. There's no investment in buildings and so on. It's an easier task. So it is, again, an entrepreneurial approach.
Absolutely.
Of the Greek government of Greece in preparing the way for the change of constitution and the law formally to allow the establishment of private. Is that something that you can see be expanded in other countries? That hybrid scheme?
Definitely. I think the trends of, as said earlier, when it comes to the collaboration partnerships, it's the strong partnerships, the lasting partnerships. Recognize trust was mentioned, but especially engagement and evolving partnership. Right? So the secret of a partnership is always, does it evolve over time? If a partnership is purely transactional, you can run my programs, we got an agreement, you pay me, and that's it. And you don't actually have an engaged partnership which actually recognizes that the institution changes, politics change, etc. It will die when the transaction is over. But what you have done here is, of course, something else, and that is you have developed engaging partnerships which evolve. And this evolution towards campuses, branch campuses, etc., embedding it much more in the Greek higher education rather than an add-on, is, I think, yes, that's definitely what you would expect to see elsewhere as well. And that is bad partnerships, the kind of transactional partnerships, they always die. You're lucky if they last 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and then that's over. What you do here is exactly the model which everybody else should be following. I think in Metropolitan College, I do admire for that have had that vision. And yes, elsewhere in the world, that will happen, and sometimes it has happened before. Let's say, the graph of the hubs for transnational and international education showed up Uzbekistan, right? Small, but nevertheless, it's a hub for international education, Uzbekistan, right? When I was approached by Uzbekistan to set up a branch campus for Westminster University, everybody said, sorry, dictatorship, why would we want to be in Tashkent of all places, right? But the truth is, because we went in there, we made it very clear that under certain conditions, we are willing to offer high-quality education, corruption-free, free elections on campus, English taught, etc., etc. That became a model. And actually, little Uzbekistan, Tashkent, actually became, in certainly Central Asia and up to and beyond, actually a gathering of good institutions. Greece does have that opportunity. Greece does have an opportunity to become an international education hub. But that will take more than just this law, in all fairness. It needs consistency, government on government supporting that. It has a language issue because, in all fairness, very frustratingly, I say this as a Dutch person with pain in my heart, but you cannot teach the world to learn Dutch first. You cannot expect the entire world to do Greek, and the Greek I learned at school, unfortunately, is particularly unhelpful, other than that I can actually read it, but that's not understand it, right? And people are not going to learn Greek first. So these are language issues, but having said that, definitely there is an opportunity and a big reward people are not learning Uzbek either, right? So yes, it could be a real game changer.
And finally, since we are close to the end, we haven't mentioned the US as much as the evidence that exists that none of the 13 institutions that have applied to the Ministry of Education are bringing an American, a US institution. One only has promised that will bring, without saying whether it's top, medium, or whatever. Trian, you have spent more time than most of us in the US. Why this is the case?
Well, I will start answering the question backwards. There are already 5 US institutions in Greece, 5 legitimate US institutions in Greece.
Which are those?
The American University of Greece, Hellenic American University, Anatolia in Thessaloniki, American College of Thessaloniki, Farm School, as well as Webster, which is a very small. So they're already here.
They are here, but not.
It's a different model. The US has a different model in regards to how it sees transnational education, I believe, and one of the ways that this actually works is, and we see that in a lot of different countries. For example, American University of Cairo, American University of Beirut. It's not actually the American University in Washington, D.C. that went to Cairo and established the American University of Cairo. There are people there, a foundation that established that in collaboration with US agencies and organizations, but it's an independent, it's a standalone institution that actually follows to the T the American educational system. So you're absolutely correct that out of the 12, I think 12 applications, there are no US applications right now. Actually, there is one. Anatolia College applied through the Open University, though, but it's a different perspective. The US has a totally different perspective, which we can analyze. I can tell you a lot of other reasons as to why this perspective exists. For example, perhaps you don't know that higher education regulation in the United States is focused on the state. There's no federal system. It's federalism, so the state is actually very important. Secondly, there are actually very strict standards, strict restrictions. Sorry, there are strict restrictions. There are restrictions in regards to the way that this regulatory system allows for somebody to be able to operate outside of the country. So what we have seen in the US is either absolute control, you know, I go to Dubai and I start my own institution, or there are foundations that, and I'm just saying Dubai, you know, I mean, there are all kinds of places around the world, or there are foundations, people coming together and establishing US institutions in other parts of the world. There's another element which perhaps is not real, but at least it seems to exist, and it's an element of crisis in the US higher education system right now, which is very well studied, very well discussed. It has to do with the cost of higher education. I really don't believe that a US institution could come partner with a college in Greece and offer the tuition that would be affordable to be able to spark interest in this to the general public, right? For studies conventionally, as we see TNE. So Professor Arkoumani's, it is, the US is a little different, and I believe the things that I mentioned conjure up in explaining to an extent why we have this environment right now, and why we are seeing what we're seeing as far as the reflection or the reaction of the United States to the new higher education law in Greece. The other thing, and the last thing I'm going to say in regards to this, I have seen that there actually are several institutions, and it was mentioned before, I don't remember who mentioned it, but it's a point that I think could be made, that actually have partnered or have professed they plan on partnering with institutions in Greece in offering specific programs, just one program, not a variety of programs, especially at the graduate level and especially at very niche areas. Is this going to happen? I'm not so sure it will, but at least there is proclamation that.
But that's a different story.
That's exactly, it's a different story. But I thought it was worth mentioning.
The fees are clearly excessive, and as I understand it, the out-of-state fees with the in-state fees are converging. When I was back, there was big difference between in-state California fees and out-of-state.
It really depends. Sorry for interjecting. It really depends on the state, seriously. I mean, we see some states that fund public higher education really well, that you have essentially, the model there is the in-state is 50% less than the out-of-state, and other states, like my state, New Hampshire, for example, that public higher education is not funded. It's funded very, very little. Like the University of New Hampshire gets something like 5% of its budget from the state. So there, essentially, the out-of-state and the international fees are almost the same as the in-state fees. But like California, like you said, it's an opposite example. New York is an opposite example. And I can start telling you about what each of the 50 states actually does. I'm not so sure it's within the scope of this discussion.
So we covered as much as we could. If there are any questions, please keep them for the question and answers session that George Daskalakis is going to lead. Some of us have to leave. Final word.
Well,
to the
I hope you have
I
hope you have a really difficult questions. The kind of questions I would not be able to answer because I have to apologize myself because I have to get to a flight and my flight is going to leave on time.
But
so
you can get them by email.
My dear friends here, especially by Paul and so on, they will happily answer any really difficult questions you might have.
Wait in the airport for emails. Okay. So thank you all, and we'll continue soon.
So amidst a thunderstorm above the Marousi campus, if there are any questions to be answered? Panel? No? Okay. So, obviously we are honored by the presence and the insights of the members of the academic board, Professor Serpo Karant and Professor Dr. Moritz, obviously the president of the academic board, Professor Dinos Akoumanis, and their visionary leadership and unwavering commitment to academic excellence continue to support the strategic direction of our institution. At the same time, we'd like to thank Katerina Arnold and Katerina Fegarou for reinforcing the enduring strength of UK and Greece educational relations. Their voices highlighted the crucial role of diplomacy, cultural exchange, and institutional trust in fostering a future-proof model of transnational education that serves students and societies alike. So as we bring this inspiring day to a close, I want to express and extend our heartfelt thanks to each and every one of you, our distinguished speakers, dedicated participants, and all those who joined us in person and online via our YouTube channel. We'll all agree that today's conference has truly lived up to its name. We have explored groundbreaking ideas, examined the shifting dynamics of global collaboration, and reflected deeply on the role that innovation and strategic partnerships will play in shaping the next chapter of international education in Greece. So, let me express our gratefulness to some of the foremost voices in the field, Professor Vangelis Tsilingyiris and Dr. Janet Ilieva, who underscored the strength and diversity of the TNE community. Our panels brought together with our long-standing and loyal partners from Oxford Brookes, Queen Margaret University, and the University of East London. We also thank to Emily Owen from Times Higher Education for bringing a global perspective, reputation, rankings, and the evolving narrative of higher education. And Piers Wall of QAA reminded us how quality assurance remains the cornerstone of trust in transnational provision. Let us also recognize the invaluable insights shared by voices within our own institution. Professor Trian Flouris, Dr. Vangelis Kondaxakis, Professor Fotis Papageorgiou, Dr. Yannis Matsoukas, whose commitment to excellence continues to shape our role as a global education hub. So, as we leave here today, let's carry forward the spirit of collaboration that filled this amphitheater. Let us be bold in reimagining partnerships, agile in embracing innovation, and steadfast in our pursuit of global impact. And together, we are not just shaping the future, we are leading it. Thank you once again for being part of this journey. We look forward to seeing the ideas shared today come to life in new partnerships, new programs, and new opportunities for learners across the globe. And as we have agreed with our partners, challenge accepted for the future. Thank you all.